Chapter 269. Feng Ling. If I don't sue you until all 18 generations of your ancestors cry with you, I, Ling Feifei, will write my name backwards. Ling Feifei was so angry that her face turned red. She did not even have time to feel sorry for the things that had been trampled on. She watched as Feng Ling took the camera's memory card away. She immediately screamed, "Even if you took the memory card, it's the same. Jinwan is shameless. Are you afraid of these photos? Did you think I didn't make a backup somewhere else? The school's internet can't possibly be blocked forever. Even if I can't post it online, as long as you don't kill me, I still have this mouth to spread it." She had just finished speaking when Feng Ling abruptly kicked her leg. Ling Feifei instantly squatted down in pain, staring at her with a pale face in disbelief. "Isn't it easy to kill you? Aren't you afraid of going to jail?" She did not expect that Feng Ling would not even be afraid of such a threat. The arrogance in Ling Feifei's eyes instantly disappeared. "I'm afraid the person who needs to worry about going to jail isn't Feng Ling." Jinwan watched for a moment before walking over. Her tone was cold, mild, and calm. "The crime of online defamation. Although this year, there hasn't been a clear criminal standard, it has already been written into the law. Based on the photos and words you posted today, as long as I don't wish to let you off, you can go to jail anytime. Then, seducing a married man as a third party, is that also a crime?" Ling Feifei raised her eyes to glare at Jinwan. "You're very proud to have slept with a man like Xiao Mo, aren't you? You clearly know that he's already married, yet you still shamelessly stick to him. Are you afraid of others saying that you're shameless? Jinwan, don't think that you can sleep with him with a clear conscience." Jinwan looked at her with her eyes wide open, as if she was crazy with jealousy because she didn't get him, but still insisted on standing on the moral high ground to catch other people's stains. Jinwan chuckled. "Then I'm really sorry. Mo Jingxin and I didn't just sleep together recently. We've been sleeping together for a long time, and we sleep together, wake up together, and have breakfast together every day. I'm really at ease with that." Ling Feifei widened her eyes, staring at her in disbelief. A few seconds later, she blurted out, "Impossible." She didn't believe it. Jinwan made it sound like she had known Xiao Mo for a long time, not just in High City. How could this be? Jinwan had clearly said that she had never had any contact with the Mo Corporation. How could she and Xiao Mo? Jinwan must be feeling guilty. She was afraid that she would really tell others about this, so she came to scare her. Ling Feifei stared at this exquisite, cold, and flawless face before her, and in her heart, she despised her even more. Although Jinwan was beautiful, Ling Feifei did not believe that someone like Xiao Mo would truly like her, much less maintain such a long-term relationship with her. Furthermore, Ling Feifei had heard that Xiao Mo's love life had always been clean. There had never been any scandals. Jinwan looked at her and smiled lazily. "Impossible? What was impossible about it? Do you think Haiqing is so big that it can't accommodate me? Or could it be that Mo Jingxin's bed could not accommodate me? Can't the gentleman you see in front of you have a normal sex life? Could it be that he can only fall in love spiritually and doesn't need a woman to sleep with him?" Ling Feifei's face flushed from her words. She couldn't tell if it was out of jealousy or anger. "You can even say such shameless words. Jinwan, how despicable must you be to be able to entangle yourself with Xiao Mo? Although Jinwan was already extremely annoyed with her and could not be bothered with her, those photos and slanderous words had thoroughly angered her. The curve of Jinwan's lips deepened. She casually said, "In terms of despicability, how can I compare to you, Miss Ling? You took the initiative to run to the backstage of the stadium to look for him. In the end, you couldn't bring yourself to leave and drag me over, using the excuse that I'm from High City to get close to him. You just couldn't find a better opportunity to put your hidden thoughts into practice. You didn't even manage to touch a corner of his clothes. In the end, when you found out that I slept with him, you were so mad that you wanted to tear me apart and destroy me. But so what if you're angry? You didn't even receive a single glance from him. I'm warning you, it's fine if you jump around like a flea in front of me, but don't hang around in front of him. Let's not talk about whether you'll have the chance to hang around in front of him. Don't even think about those dirty thoughts in your heart. Otherwise, I'll only feel disgusted. I'll feel annoyed whenever I see you. The more Ling Feifei listened, the uglier her expression became. In the end, she was so angry that her hands were trembling. Jin Wan, didn't you just climb into his bed? How many times can you sleep with him? I'm afraid COMO has already left T-City. After he leaves, what do you count as? If not for Feng Ling, what right do you, a shameless third party, have to stand on my head and bully me? Hearing this, Jin Wan abruptly sneered. I really admire your stubbornness. Ling Feifei was about to stand up indignantly when Feng Ling kicked her knee again. Ling Feifei immediately fell to the ground in pain. Idiot, do you know who I am? Feng Ling coldly reprimanded. Why would I care who you are? Ling Feifei glared at her with reddened eyes. Feng Ling coldly raised her brows. I'm Mrs. Mo's private bodyguard. Ha, I knew someone like you would only have the life of a bodyguard. You can't even show yourself in public. What private bodyguard? What Mrs. Mo? Ling Feifei was about to continue scolding when her complexion suddenly paled. Because of Feng Ling's identity, and because of the so-called Mrs. Mo private bodyguard? Mrs. Mo? From the moment Feng Ling appeared, she had been silently protecting Jin Wan. No matter what Jin Wan did, Feng Ling would definitely be present. Ling Feifei sat stiffly on the ground. She raised her eyes to look at Jin Wan. Jin Wan's gaze was unhurried as it landed on her. In an instant, all sorts of embarrassment and grievances surged up. Ling Feifei took a deep breath, her eyes reddening. You're all lying. How could Jin Wan be Mrs. Mo? However, when she thought about it carefully, from the moment Mo Jingshan appeared, to the time he pointed out Jin Wan's coordinates in the stadium, to the time he went to T University's cafeteria because of Jin Wan, to the time when Jin Wan ate salty fish, he gave her water. Such a natural action, and everything that happened after that. Ling Feifei looked toward Feng Ling, seeking the truth. Feng Ling only responded with a cold gaze. Looking at her, it was as though she was looking at a huge joke. Chapter 270. Bai Wei received Ling Feifei's gaze and finally spoke up. I'm not too clear about the relationship between Jin Wan and COMO, but Jin Wan is the daughter of Hai Cheng's G Group. You should have known about this back then at the G family's department store. However, you refused to believe it. A bolt from the blue. Ling Feifei directly sat on the ground and did not move. Her gaze was frozen on Jin Wan for a long time. She stared at Jin Wan, who had been acting like the manager of a small studio for the past 2 months. Jin Wan tilted her head slightly, her tone light and languid. Speaking of which, Miss Ling, since you've always looked down on me, I'll play along with your arrogance. I've been here for more than 2 months, but I haven't tried to suppress you. It's almost 3 months, and we're about to go our separate ways, but you still insist on knocking into my gun. Just based on your fabricated words in these photos, I can sue you at any time. Ling Feifei was angered to the point where blood was rushing to her head. I don't care if you're really a third party or a fake daughter. You're in the wrong for instigating your bodyguards to beat up your roommate. If you want to sue me, fine, we'll sue each other. Don't even think of taking advantage of me. Do you have any advantages for me to take advantage of? Even if I ordered my bodyguards to beat you up, I've already reasoned with you. What about you? Did I ask you to take these photos, or did I beg you to follow me? Just these photos of us alighting from the car and having a meal, and you're able to come up with all sorts of stories. Your imagination is really rich. From the start, I've never targeted you. You acting like a snob is your own problem. I don't need to trouble myself to correct your way of thinking. For the past 2 months, you've been yelling without using your brain. You've taken a few photos and posted them on the internet. I've let you off time and time again. Now you're asking for it, understand? Jin Wan paused for several seconds. The curve on her lips deepened. Besides, you keep saying that I interfered in Mo Jingshan's marriage. You don't even know who I am. Don't you find it laughable? Ling Feifei's lips moved. However, when she saw Jin Wan's cold gaze, she recalled why someone like Mo Jingshan, who had nothing to do with the education industry, would come to T University. She finally understood. She bit her lower lip so hard that it turned white. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't. She could only sit in the corner of the dormitory with red eyes. She wanted to say that she didn't believe Jinwan was really Co Mo's wife, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. Feng Ling gave her a look that said, "You deserve it," and threw the camera's memory card to Jinwan. "You said there are backups of these photos, right?" Jinwan asked. "Then Feng Ling and I won't stand on ceremony with your computer and other electronic products in the dormitory. There aren't any backups. The only backup is this memory card." Ling Feifei choked as she spoke. She glanced at Jinwan timidly. Jinwan directly snapped the memory card and gave Feng Ling a look. Feng Ling picked up Ling Feifei's laptop as well. Ling Feifei was just about to stand up to snatch it back when her knees hurt so much that she fell back to the ground. She watched as Feng Ling opened her laptop and searched it. After confirming that the photos stored in the laptop had already been deleted by her guiltily, she then reformatted her laptop and tossed it back onto her bed. Only then did this matter come to an end. This matter could be considered to have come to an end with Ling Feifei. However, in the 5 minutes that the photos and posts were on the school's website, several people had seen them. For the past 2 days, some of the female students in T University had been discussing this matter in private. 2 days later, it was T University's 100th anniversary. Aside from T University's school leaders, teachers, and students, there were also many famous figures in the education world. The atmosphere tonight could be described as extremely grand. Ling Feifei no longer dared to provoke Jinwan. She did not even dare to continue staying in the dormitory. She directly moved out. That night, she wore a gown and stood together with the other girls in Professor Lin's class, standing far away. When she saw Jinwan, Bai Wei, and Feng Ling enter together, she only glanced in their direction. Her gaze landed on Jinwan's gold-plated gown. With one glance, she could tell that the design was low-key and gorgeous. Everything proved that Jinwan was indeed not the person in charge of a small studio that she had always thought she was. Ling Feifei could only suppress her anger in her heart and did not dare to approach. However, earlier on, there were already several female students quietly discussing whether Jinwan had really become Co Mo's mistress. No matter what, Jinwan's face would not look too good. The moment Jinwan appeared, the whispering voices were suppressed. However, this did not affect the female students who stood together in groups of 3 to 5. One by one, they passed on the rumors, making it seem as though the rumors were true. Their gazes that landed on Jinwan's side were filled with disdain, doubt, and disdain. However, tonight's theme was T University's 100th anniversary. After the ceremony began, the students all stood quietly in the luxurious and spacious venue until the school leaders finished their speeches and the cocktail party began. Bai Wei, Jinwan, and Feng Ling sat at a quiet corner on the second floor, drinking champagne and chatting. All of a sudden, Su Yao, who had always been close to Ling Feifei, intentionally spilled the glass in her hand onto Jinwan's beautiful gown as she passed by. Thankfully, Feng Ling reacted quickly and pulled Jinwan to the side, preventing Jinwan's gown from being dirted. She turned to look coldly at Su Yao. "Are you seeking death?" "Yo, my hand merely slipped. It's not like the wine really spilled on her. That Ji Shao-san, or hasn't even gotten angry yet. Why are you so anxious?" Su Yao sneered. Clearly, Ling Feifei did not dare to tell others about her misunderstanding of Jinwan because of her face. Her voice was not soft, and it immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding people. Right now, the school leaders were all drinking below the stage, and there was no one to preside over the situation. In an instant, everyone's gaze landed on Jinwan. The rumors and slanders that had been spreading ever since the school's website was blocked seemed to be hidden in the various gazes of these people. Like sharp blades, they sliced toward Jinwan's direction. "I say, Jinwan, from a glance, I can tell that your gown is expensive. Did Co Mo buy it for you? As expected, you've hugged Co Mo's thigh? You've been showing off quite a bit recently, haven't you? How does it feel to interfere in someone else's marriage? I really look down on people like you?" Suddenly, she felt a chill on her head, cutting off Su Yao's arrogant and cursing words. Everyone only saw a glass of champagne spilling from the top. Not a single drop was left, and all of it splashed onto her head. Then, It splashed onto her gown and dripped down. In an instant she was in a sorry state. Su Yao raised her hand in shock to touch the wine on her head. The surrounding people were even more shocked. Chapter 271. The man stood there, dressed in a black suit. The light flashed across his body, revealing a white shirt underneath. The exquisite, expensive, and low-profile cufflinks on his wrist reflected a sharp, cold light under the light. Su Yao realized that someone had splashed wine on her. She angrily grabbed at her wet and disheveled hair, raising her head to scold, "Who is it? Who dares to splash wine on this old lady?" The security guards in the venue heard the commotion and immediately surrounded them. Ling Feifei also rushed forward, running to Su Yao's side. She was about to speak when Su Yao angrily said, "He's still upstairs. I don't know who is so daring to splash wine in a place like this. What are you security guards doing eating? Go and bring him down right now. I want to see who it is." Before she could finish her words, the man on the stairs had already started walking down. The moment she saw the man's well-ironed trousers and straight legs, Su Yao's expression faltered. She looked up carefully and saw that the man was unbuttoning his black suit jacket as he walked down. His white, handmade shirt was so clean that one could not shift their gaze away. With one glance, she could tell that it was expensive. He was only walking down the stairs. The man's steps were steady and slow. His black leather shoes were like a bright spot that attracted everyone's attention. Step by step, he walked down the stairs. The man only glanced down, allowing everyone to clearly see his handsome face that caused one's hair to stand on end. He was also wearing a white shirt, but he was not as amiable and easygoing as he had been that day in the stadium when he chatted with them. The man's clear and handsome brows and eyes indifferently swept across their bodies. His gaze was extremely calm and cold. Although he was clearly the one who had splashed the wine, his handsome face was unruffled. His eyes were deep, and as he walked down, his gaze seemed to contain a thin layer of coldness. It was actually Mo Jingshan. The crowd was in an uproar. Su Yao's curses were instantly swallowed back. The moment Ling Feifei saw Mo Jingshan, she subconsciously took a step back. Not only were the others shocked, even Ji Nuan did not expect this. She turned to look at the man who had already walked down the stairs. Didn't he return to High City more than a week ago? Aren't you very busy these few days? Last night, she had even called him. Before hanging up, she had reluctantly said that she missed him. At that time, he did not mention that he would be coming to T-City to attend the school anniversary with her. She had thought that she was only wearing this gown for her to see. She did not expect that he would actually come. Feng Ling watched as the man approached. She could clearly sense the coldness emanating from Mo Jingshan's body. When those photos were randomly posted online by Ling Feifei, Feng Ling knew that Mo Jingshan would not allow Ji Nuan to be bullied by these young ladies. Being banned from the school's network for a day was the lightest punishment. The debts that needed to be settled were all in the future. Under the various colored lights in the venue, the man's handsome face was blurred by the faint smoke, making him look unusually cold. Everyone looked at Mo Jingshan, including the school leaders and famous people from all walks of life. They had invited him several times but never received a positive response. They didn't expect that he would really come. Mo Jingshan approached Ji Nuan. When he paused, he looked at her hand that was gripping the wine glass. His clear voice slowly said, "Pour it back." Ji Nuan's expression faltered. She turned to look at the trembling Su Yao and the pale-faced Ling Feifei. Earlier, Su Yao did not actually pour the wine on her. However, if Feng Ling had not reacted quickly, it most likely would have been splashed on her. Su Yao opened her mouth and muttered, "Mo, aren't you being too biased towards her? Could it be that people from the upper class like you can be so high-profile even when you're having an affair?" Mo Jingshan's long and slender fingers caressed the empty wine glass in his hand. He chuckled coldly and placed the glass down. "Affair? My marriage and feelings have always followed Ji Nuan's path. I've never deviated from it. How could I have an affair?" Su Yao did not understand. She looked at the calm and composed Ji Nuan in confusion before turning to look at the pale-faced Ling Feifei who was hiding behind the crowd. Right now, Ling Feifei really did not dare to speak. From Mo Jingshan's words, She clearly understood the truth. Jin Wan was indeed his wife. His words could not be any clearer. A school leader could not bear to watch any longer. He furrowed his brows and said, "What are you girls thinking about all day? Miss G has always been Seo Mo's wife. It's just that she doesn't like being an idle rich wife at home. That's why she started her own business and took time out to learn business management. How on earth did she hinder you? Why are you making a ruckus here?" In just a few seconds, not only did Su Yao's expression change greatly, everyone who had secretly doubted and discussed Jin Wan's gossip also stared in Jin Wan's direction in disbelief. It was not that she had never been in such a crowded situation before. However, most of the people here were students who were not familiar with her. For a moment, Jin Wan was slightly uncomfortable. Mo Jingshan's hand immediately gripped hers. The moment those incredulous gazes saw the way he gripped Jin Wan's hand, they became even more astonished. No wonder Mo Jingshan would suddenly contact and cooperate with T University. It turned out that it was because Jin Wan was here. Based on this, if not for Jin Wan, T University's century-old library would not have been rebuilt so generously. After all, this was not a small sum of money. No company in the country would be willing to fork out such a sum. However, the immeasurably virtuous construction of this historical library could be said to be entirely due to Jin Wan. In an instant, the students who were unaware of the truth did not dare to speak further. Instead, they looked in their direction with envy and admiration. Only people like Ling Feifei and Su Yao felt as though there was a thorn in their backs. They could not wait to disappear from this place. "You're really Seo Mo's wife?" Su Yao was still somewhat confused. Ling Feifei, who had clearly been inciting her to target Jin Wan, was currently hiding far away. There was no way for her to seek confirmation. However, from Ling Feifei's attitude, it was likely that she already knew. That was why she was hiding so far away. "No matter who I am, even if I'm really the manager of an unremarkable small studio, it's not your place to point fingers at me." Jin Wan's red lips moved slightly. Her tone was slow and calm. "Just because I'm not Mo Jingshan's wife, I can allow you to slander me and ruin my reputation?" So, I heard from Ling Feifei, and those photos. The photos on the school forum were all of Ling. Chapter 272. Su Yao immediately choked. She knew that she was in the wrong and did not dare to say or do anything else. She could only bite down on her lips and remain silent. However, her eyes were slightly guilty as they glanced at the wine glass in Jin Wan's hand. She was worried that Jin Wan would really pour this glass of wine on her again. Earlier, the glass that President Mo poured on her was already enough to embarrass her. If he did it again, Jin Wan glanced at the wine on the ground that Su Yao didn't pour on her and then at her. "I didn't intend to make it so big, but I'm a person who keeps a low profile when it's time to keep a low profile, and when it's time to take revenge, I'll return the favor." Su Yao immediately stiffened. She did not know what Jin Wan was planning to do. Everyone watched as Jin Wan gently swirled the wine glass in her hand and slowly approached Su Yao. She raised the glass slightly and began to pour the champagne from her waist. When the champagne flowed down her skirt bit by bit, Su Yao only stood there, not daring to move. Her lips had turned white from biting down on them, and her eyes did not dare to glare at Jin Wan. Jin Wan glanced at the wine that flowed down her skirt. Her gaze suddenly shifted to Ling Feifei, who was hiding behind the school leader. "It's quite a pity for this wine to flow down like this. Miss Ling, do you want to come over and drink a few drops?" By drinking a few drops, it was clear that she wanted Ling Feifei to come over and drink the wine that flowed down Su Yao's skirt. Just as everyone was wondering why Jin Wan was targeting Ling Feifei, Jin Wan's red lips moved slightly. Her voice was unhurried. "Don't you like to secretly take photos of us, post them on the internet, and then slander us behind our backs? Such a courageous person, why are you hiding behind the school leader?" Everyone's puzzled gaze immediately became clear. It turned out that the mastermind was Ling Feifei. Ling Feifei shrunk her neck and did not speak. Earlier, when Mo Jingshan was not present, she did not dare to do anything due to Jin Wan's presence. Now that Mo Jingshan was present, she did not dare to make a single sound. She just bit her lip and stood behind the school leaders. When everyone's eyes were on her, she buried her head even deeper. The school leader frowned and asked, "Did you really do such a thing?" Ling Feifei shook her head forcefully, but she did not dare to lie. In the end, she turned pleadingly toward Bai Wei behind Jin Wan, hoping that she would speak up for her on account that they were roommates. However, Bai Wei's disdainful gaze lingered on her face. In the end, she only coldly curled her lips, her gaze seemingly telling her that she deserved it. In an instant, she had mysteriously become the target of public criticism. Ling Feifei's initial goal was to make Jin Wan infamous in the school. She wanted Jin Wan to be too embarrassed to even attend the school anniversary party. If she continued, she most likely would not be able to wear her gown anymore. It was too hot. "Then, are you thirsty?" Bai Wei perceptively brought over a glass of champagne and a bottle of mineral water. She handed them to Jin Wan. "Which do you want to drink?" Jin Wan had yet to speak when Mo Jingshan took the bottle of water from Bai Wei's hands. He nodded at her in thanks and twisted open the bottle cap, stuffing the water into Jin Wan's hands. "You've already drunk 3 or 4 glasses of champagne tonight. You can only drink water from now on." Jin Wan knew that her alcohol tolerance was only 3 or 4 glasses. If she drank any more, she would most likely embarrass herself again. She raised the water and took a sip before releasing a long breath. She raised her hand to fan her face. Although the venue is air-conditioned, there are too many people. It's only been a few steps, but it's already so hot. Mo Jingshan watched as Jin Wan's face was slightly red from the heat. His gaze deepened. At this moment, someone in the crowd was planning to take the opportunity to speak to CEO Mo and see if there were any opportunities to work together in the future. However, before he could speak, the surrounding students and school leaders who were still playing games had yet to recover from the atmosphere. In the next second, everyone heard a shrill scream. They turned to see the rumored cold and aloof Mo suddenly encircling Jin Wan in his arms, bending down to kiss her lips. Jin Wan had yet to react when the lights in the venue suddenly shone in their direction. She subconsciously raised her eyes and saw that Mo Jingshan had blocked the blinding lights. The white light before her eyes abruptly disappeared, and the sky turned dark. The sun and moon seemed to have lost their light. Chapter 273. The surrounding crowd erupted in screams. Regardless of whether it was the students or the school's leaders, they were all stirred up. Someone from the organizers started the uproar, and the big screen in the venue, which was only used for monitoring, suddenly cut to the two of them, allowing everyone to clearly see the scene on the screen when Mo Jingshan suddenly took Jin Wan into his arms and kissed her. Everyone was shouting, and waves of people came closer, completely surrounding them in a circle. They even raised their phones to take pictures of this scene of dog abuse. Jin Wan, who was already having difficulty breathing due to the heat, instantly felt her face heat up. She subconsciously tried to push him away but was unable to do so. She was going crazy. Mo Jingshan was usually even more low-key than her. Was he abandoning his cold and aloof persona? It was one thing for him to bully Qin Siding and Xia Tian, but this was T University's anniversary celebration. Thousands of people were present. What the hell was on the large screen? Why could she see it on the large screen? Jin Wan really could not push him away. There were simply too many people around. When the man finally let her go, Jin Wan directly buried her face into his shoulder, not daring to show her face again. Feng Ling, who was standing by the side, revealed a rare smile. She scanned the crowd and saw that Ling Feifei's disinterested expression was ashen, as though she had completely given up. Feng Ling finally shifted her gaze away with a cold smile. It was just a kiss. For a married couple, this was all too common. However, for many of the youthful students, especially on T University's 100-year anniversary, it was a historic moment. Mo Jingshan did not say anything to the surrounding people. He held the bashful Jin Wan in his arms, holding her waist. "Didn't you say that the honeymoon period is over? Why are you so shy?" Jin Wan's face was burning in his arms. "There are too many people, Mo Jingshan. Your legs have gone soft?" Jin Wan, "A little, Mo Jingshan. Shall I carry you back?" Jin Wan, the school anniversary wasn't the most embarrassing thing. What Jean Wan was afraid of was being intercepted by a group of MO Corporation's fans or fangirls after the anniversary. Sure enough, when she went to the upper room of the venue to change out of her gown and was about to leave with MO Jingshin, there were already many people waiting at the main entrance of the venue. It seemed that the reporters who had tried to come in to participate in the school anniversary had heard about what had happened inside and were eagerly waiting outside to take photos of the legendary CEO MO. In the end, Jean Wan could only choose to drag Boss Missouri, who rarely made a cold and high-profile appearance, out of the venue from the side. Rather than saying that she was slipping away, it was more accurate to say that she was forcefully dragging him out from the side. The man laughed as he watched her act like a thief. Jean Wan, on the other hand, kept her waist bent, as though she was avoiding some paparazzi as she quietly walked out. The side entrance was not as wide as the main entrance. Outside was the busiest night market in T-City. The moment Jean Wan stepped out of the side entrance, she heard someone calling her name. She immediately grabbed Mo Jingshin and ran into the crowd. As she ran, she held onto Mo Jingshin's wrist tightly. After running for several minutes, she suddenly stopped. She placed her hands on her knees, panting heavily as though she could barely catch her breath. She then raised her hand to unbutton a few buttons on her slightly thicker jacket so that she could breathe more freely. She turned to find that this was already a relatively crowded area of the night market. People came and went, and both sides of the crowd were filled with stalls specially used for the night market. In a place like this, it was likely that they would not be able to squeeze in quickly. Even if they managed to get in, it would be difficult to find them in such a large crowd. Jean Wan released a light breath. She turned to see that one of Mo Jingshin's hands was held tightly by her, while the other was casually placed in his pocket. He lowered his eyes to look at her panting heavily after running for several minutes and looked at her with a hint of a smile on his face. "Your sports cells are so undeveloped, yet you're still trying so hard to pull me along?" Jean Wan took a long time to catch her breath. She straightened her body and looked back before glancing at him from the corner of her eyes. "Isn't that because we played games in the venue earlier? There were too many people and it was too hot. You're the best. You ran so fast with me, yet you're not even panting." Seeing Jean Wan's angry expression and her slightly flushed face from running so quickly, Mo Jingshin spoke in a heavy voice that only she could hear. "With your stamina, if you don't train properly, you'll only find it harder and harder to stand in front of me in the future." She instantly understood the hidden meaning behind his words. Jean Wan raised her hand to fan the redness on her face while glaring at him. "Did you specially come here to save me today, or did you do it on purpose?" Mo Jingshin smiled faintly. Originally, he was only a step away from her. All of a sudden, he took a step forward. Just as Jean Wan was about to subconsciously take a step back, he lowered his head. Jean Wan was instantly forced back by this oppressive angle. She could not help but bend her waist. At the same time, the man's arm was wrapped around her waist. He pressed her into his embrace, and her entire body was pressed into his embrace. "You've gotten a bargain, yet you're still acting innocent. Who was the one who said that if the gown is too beautiful, you'll feel a little lonely attending the school anniversary alone?" Did I say that? You said it with your eyes. I specially took a night to fly here. Tonight, I'll fly to High City, and tomorrow morning, I still have to fly back. It's fine that you didn't even express your gratitude, but now you're even blaming me for a kiss? Was that a kiss? There were so many people at the venue. She had yet to finish speaking when the man's lips pressed closer once more. "Do you want to try kissing me here again?" Jean Wan's gaze immediately shifted to the side. She saw the envious gazes of the passers-by and rushed to take a step back. She raised her hand to cover her slightly red face, feeling extremely embarrassed. "But I really didn't expect there to be a night market here." Jean Wan turned back to look at the various food and clothing stalls on both sides. She suddenly sniffed hard and furrowed her brows. "What's this smell? Why is it so smelly?" As she spoke, she saw two young ladies holding a few skewers of fried stinky tofu in their hands. They were eating as they walked. Jean Wan's eyes brightened. She directly approached the nearby stall selling stinky tofu. She stared at the various golden pieces that were being fried in the oil pan and asked, "Is this stinky tofu?" The owner of the oil pan handed over a skewer of stinky tofu while smiling and replying, "That's right. Little miss, do you want a skewer of stinky tofu? 2 yuan a skewer, 5 yuan 3 skewers." It did not smell much, but it looked quite delicious. Furthermore, many people really bought it. In her previous life, when Jean Wan was still in the Ji family, she rarely came to such places. She had never eaten these street stalls. In the later years, even if she had the opportunity to pass by the various night markets, she did not have the spare money to eat at the roadside stalls. Chapter 274. Jean Wan saw that there were many people who came to buy and wanted to try it even more. She turned back to look at Mo Jingshan, who was standing slightly further away because of the smell. She walked back and said with a smile, "Do you want to eat? I'll go buy a few to try together." Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "You've never eaten it before? Our lives and social circles are not connected to this place. How would we have the chance to come to the night market? Just like how you don't have the time to stroll around here. How would you have the chance to eat this? But I've often heard people say that the smelly smells delicious. I want to try it. Do you want to eat it?" Jean Wan turned to buy it as she spoke. In the end, her wrist was heavy. Mo Jingshan decisively pulled her back. "It's best if you haven't eaten it. It's not clean." "Who says it's not clean? Then aren't there many people buying it? Have you eaten it before?" "Then why do you say it's not clean?" "I'll just try it. I'll buy a few." Mo Jingshan did not let her go. He single-handedly pulled her over and wrapped his arm around her back to bring her away. He then glanced at Jean Wan's resentful expression because she did not get to eat what she wanted to eat. He said firmly, "You're not allowed to eat it." Jean Wan had no choice. This kind of thing was most likely hard to tolerate in front of someone like Mo Jingshan, who was obsessed with cleanliness. She turned to look at the various snacks sold at the roadside stalls. As she walked, she said pitifully in a small voice, "I've never eaten any of these before. You won't let me try any of them. Earlier at the venue, I only drank 3 glasses of champagne and didn't eat anything else. Right now, I'm starving. If you're hungry, go back and eat. I'll make dinner, and?" In the end, even if Great Boss Missouri said he would personally cook, it was useless. "AI, look at this lamb skewer. It smells especially good. And that numbing and spicy skewer? There's even glutinous rice cake." Mo Jingshan, Great Boss Missouri, Tall Mo, Mr. Mo. "Hubby, just let me buy some to try. I'll only eat a little." In the end, under Jean Wan's coaxing and pestering, Mo Jingshan finally got her to buy a small bag of handmade chocolate biscuits and a few pieces of glutinous rice pancakes. As for the other fried and barbecued foods, they were completely forbidden. She wasn't allowed to eat them. There were many people here, and the light was dim. Jean Wan stood in the crowd and quickly stuffed a piece of glutinous rice cake into her mouth. She smiled with satisfaction. As expected, the snacks in the night market live up to their reputation. So sweet. Mo Jingshan glanced at her as though she was a gluttonous child. He allowed her to follow behind and eat as she walked. He held her hand and led the way. They planned to walk out of the night market before turning to the main entrance of the venue. Jean Wan stuffed another piece into her mouth, filling it to the brim. Her face was puffed up as she smiled at the tall and straight figure in front of her. For Mo Jingshan to pass by such a place, she felt as though he was being dragged down from the clouds to the mortal world. Of course, it was unavoidable that the young ladies who passed by nearby would constantly throw their love-struck gazes in their direction. Jean Wan saw that Mo Jingshan was so low-key and quiet as he walked through the crowd, yet he was still so eye-catching. She could only wipe her mouth and quickly follow him, obediently following by his side. "AI, wait a minute." Jean Wan saw that there were many clothes hanging in the stall by the side. Most importantly, there was one that she had worn in her previous life. For some reason, her heart skipped a beat. She called out to Mo Jingshan and subconsciously turned to walk over. The owner of the roadside stall saw her approach and enthusiastically asked, "Which one do you want? My family's clothes are all bought from big shopping malls." They're all from big brands that have been abandoned. Every one of them is of good quality. Miss, if you like them, you can choose any. Jean-Wan picked up a white t-shirt with a simple design printed on it. How much is this? This one. The roadside stall owner glanced at the clothes she was wearing. The quality was not bad, and the price would not be too low. He directly said, 280. Mo Jingshin stood behind and raised his brows. He discovered that Jean-Wan was especially interested in these roadside stalls tonight. 280? Jean-Wan smiled. Did this owner think that she did not know what was good? That's right. 280, no bargaining. 60, are you selling it? The owner had never seen someone haggle so fiercely. His gaze immediately shifted to Jean-Wan's body, and he coughed. That's too little. 150. Jean-Wan sneered and placed the t-shirt in his hands. 60 yuan. If you don't want to sell it, then forget it. She then turned to leave. The owner originally thought that he would be able to scam off a rich customer. He did not expect that this young lady would not fall for it. He rushed to say, all right. Can I add another 10 yuan? It's not easy for me to do business. Jean-Wan did not turn back. Just 60. All right, 60. The owner helplessly called her back, handing the shirt over. Jean-Wan finally turned back with a smile. She suddenly felt Mo Jingshin's human-shaped credit card machine approach her from behind. She rushed to say, I can't swipe my card here. I'll pay in cash. Anyway, it's only 60 yuan. Mo Jingshin lowered his eyes to glance at her sparkling eyes that were smiling from successfully haggling. He was strangely infected, and the light in his eyes gently landed on her head. T-City's night was not as cold as High City's winter. The air was only slightly chilly, and the people coming and going reduced the chill by several degrees. The surroundings were bustling with activity, especially the night market, which was hung high up with colorful lanterns. It was extravagant and tacky, yet exceptionally down-to-earth, symbolizing the warmth and excitement of this place. How is it? Does it look good? Jean-Wan gestured the shirt in front of her. Mo Jingshin watched her happy expression, and the corners of his lips curved up. He chuckled softly. You've never come into contact with a place like a night market before. Tonight, aside from the snacks, you're actually especially interested in these clothes? Jean-Wan's head leaned against his arm. It's not that I'm interested in the clothes, but I'm especially interested in haggling with these roadside stall owners. Let me tell you, I've already gone easy on him earlier. Otherwise, I could have bought this shirt for 40 yuan. In her previous life, she had worn the exact same ordinary cotton t-shirt. Back then, she had spent 40 yuan on it. Mo Jingshin sighed and smiled at her sudden desire to haggle. It's not like you haven't worn high-quality t-shirts that cost tens of thousands of yuan. Are you sure you want to wear this? It's not like I haven't worn it before, Jean-Wan softly muttered. Mo Jingshin's footsteps paused, lowering his eyes to look at her. What did you say earlier? Chapter 275. Seeing that Mo Jingshin clearly did not want to eat it, Jean-Wan brought the biscuit closer to his mouth. Just one bite. The man had already given in to her childish actions countless times. This time, he unsurprisingly gave her face and ate the biscuit. How is it? Does it taste good? It's all right. Boss Missouri meant that it did not taste bad. It could also be interpreted as delicious. Mo Jingshin naturally knew that she was gloating right now and let her be. When the two of them walked out of the night market, it was already very late. The night market was very long. Although Jean-Wan had brought daily clothes that could be used to change into her gown, she was still wearing the pair of high heels that matched her gown. Her feet were already aching when they ran out of the venue. After walking such a long night market, her feet were in so much pain that they did not feel like they belonged to her. Did you come straight to the venue after landing? Didn't you drive? Jean-Wan looked at the crowd and cars at the end of the night market. It seemed like it was difficult to hail a taxi here because there were too many people. I didn't drive. Then how are we going back? Jean-Wan looked at the sea of people. There were almost no empty cabs. This was not T University. It was just a venue in the city center that T University had chosen to hold its 100-year anniversary celebration. From here to T University and the condominium, it would take at least half an hour to hail a taxi. However, it was impossible to hail a taxi here. There aren't many people at the plaza by the main entrance. It's more convenient to hail a taxi. The plaza by the main entrance? Jin-won turned back to look in the direction of the venue. This place was already very far away. If they were to circle to the main entrance, she would see the long streets and streetlights in the distance. Her feet began to hurt even more. Mo Jingshin lowered his head to take a look. Your feet hurt? It's all right. These high heels that match the gown are slightly higher than normal shoes. It's not convenient to walk, Jin-won answered casually. The man smiled mildly. Seeing that she was clearly in so much pain that she did not have the courage to continue walking, yet still wanted to save her face, his thin lips curved into a light smile. It's not like I'll laugh at you if you say it hurts. Why are you still trying to act tough? What else can I do if I don't act tough? I can't possibly sleep on the streets, right? Furthermore, my apartment is in T-City, which isn't too far away. There's no need for me to stay in a nearby hotel. Besides, I don't have my ID card with me, so I can't even enter the hotel. Jin-won carried the small bags in her hands and raised her leg, attempting to relieve the pain in the soles of her feet. And it's already so late. Even if I call your driver over, he's probably already resting. I'd better take a taxi. Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly paused, because the tall man had already squatted down in front of her. Come up. Jin-won looked at the crowd around her, then at the square far away from the main entrance of the venue, and then at the man squatting in front of her. Her lips curved into a sweet smile, and without a word, she leaned over his back. Mo Jingshin carried her on his back, striding forward. His steps were neither fast nor slow, steady and orderly. Jin-won wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face against the back of his neck. Have you carried anyone before? There was a hint of amusement in the man's voice. Of course not. Your fiancée in America didn't carry her either, did she? No. Jin-won wanted to ask more, but she remembered that he had previously returned to America to resolve this matter. Right now, there was indeed no need to mention this person, although she still did not know who that American woman was. She rubbed her face against his ear, asking softly, Am I heavy? He smiled mildly. How heavy do you think you are? I usually eat quite a lot. Previously, I ate so much that I almost thought I was really pregnant. My weight must have increased by a few pounds. As she spoke, she hugged his neck tightly and lowered her eyes to look at the cheap white t-shirt in the bag in her hands. That was the t-shirt she often wore in her previous life when she was so poor that she could not even afford to buy clothes that cost 100 yuan. She asked softly, You're so good to me. You don't even let me experience the slightest bit of pain and suffering. I'm almost spoiled to the point of becoming a glass princess. The kind that will shatter the moment I touch the ground. After a moment of silence, the man smiled mildly. By my side, what you don't need to experience the most is the pain and suffering of the world. Jin-won murmured, Is this an honor that only belongs to Mrs. Mo? It belongs to you. It belongs to Jin-won. Jin-won leaned against the man's shoulder, her lips curling up. Belong to her? The woman pressed her face against the man's, whispering against his warmth, So, why is it me? He did not speak. Mo Jingshin. N. On the long street at night, the two had already walked far away from the liveliness of the night market. However, there were still cars passing by quickly. The distance between the quiet and the liveliness seemed to have been separated by the two of them. The world was vast, but the only thing in her world was his warm back. You must have secretly fallen for me when I wasn't aware of it, right? Otherwise, how could you have agreed to marry me so easily, and how could you have always treated me so well? The tall and straight man smiled. He did not reply and continued to walk forward with her on his back. You've been carrying me for so long. Are you tired? I'm tired. Then let me get down and walk by myself. It's not far from here to the plaza. The man did not put her down. Instead, his grip on her body tightened. Lie down properly. Don't move. You already said you're tired. You haven't stopped talking the entire way. I'm tired from chatting with you. He actually disliked her for talking too much. When the two returned home, Ji-won rushed to change out of her shoes. Only then did she feel much more relaxed. After showering, Jingshun lowered his head to kiss her face. Nwan. My flight is back to High City tomorrow morning. I'll be flying overseas the day after. After pausing for several seconds, he calmly added, I'll be back soon. When you finish your classes next week, I'll come straight to T-City to pick you up. Ji-won nodded. After a moment, she hesitantly made an "oh" sound. She felt that most of the things Jingshun was busy with were not in the country. Furthermore, it had been a long time since she heard any news about Nanheng. Feng Ling's lips were also tightly sealed. She did not know what exactly Jingshun was busy with. I'm worried about you returning to High City alone. Be good and stay in the condo for the next few days. Wait for me to come back next week. Have Feng Ling pack your things, and I'll come to pick you up, en? Ji-won did not question further. All right. Chapter 276. Ji-won nodded obediently. For some strange reason, she felt that Jingshun's words today were much more than any other time. Where are you flying to this time? America? Or Japan? She asked subconsciously. He touched her hair and said softly, When I come back, I'll bring you a local gift. You'll know. A few days later, Ji-won received a call from Ji Hongwen. It had been 10 days since Ji Mengran disappeared. Ji Hongwen's voice was lower and older than usual. He didn't sound too depressed, but Ji-won knew that he hadn't been eating or sleeping well recently. Today was the anniversary of Ji-won's mother's death. It had been so many years, and the sadness had been covered by time. Ji-won habitually looked at the sky for a long time on this day, and then she received a call from Ji Hongwen. Nwan, Dad knows that you don't want to ask me too much because of Mengran. There are many truths that I plan to hide from you for the rest of my life. You will always be my daughter, and I'm not going to tell you those things until I die. If you don't want to tell me, I won't force you. Ji-won replied, I don't plan to find my biological father or recognize him as my biological father, and now Mengran's matter is pressing on your heart. You don't need to, it doesn't matter. Now that things have come to this point, deliberately hiding it will only cause harm. Your mother has been gone for many years. I couldn't hide what she told me. I didn't expect that Mengran would know and come to you to slander you. Ji Hongwen sighed heavily. Before your mother married me, she had a past. It was a past that she was forced into. She didn't love your biological father. Back then, I was also a young man who sacrificed my life for love. Even though your mother was pregnant, I still married her without hesitation. I promised to treat you as my own daughter. Nwan, I watched you grow up. This father-daughter relationship is no different from the relationship between me and Mengran. Do you understand? I understand, Dad. Ji-won didn't expect that after so many days of silence, Ji Hongwen finally decided to tell her the truth. Now the burden on her heart was much lighter. At least she was no longer the only one who was kept in the dark. As for who your biological father is, maybe you will never meet him again in this life. Even if you meet him, I'm afraid he will never know of your existence. I don't intend to repeat these old stories too much. After all, it happened more than 20 years ago, and it's all about your mother's resentment. It has nothing to do with you. Nwan, I don't know. Ji-won's eyes were filled with tears. Dad, I've never denied your existence. We are the same as before. I won. I won. I and you won. And Ji won. And you won, right? Ji-won's eyes welled up with tears. Dad, I've never denied your existence. We're still the same as before. I won't change and you won't change, right? Yes. Ji Hongwen's voice was a bit hoarse from excitement. Good girl, I know Mengran is wrong. She has made many mistakes, and I have never been biased towards anyone. However, I have not heard from her for a long time. My mood has been affected, but I don't mean to ignore you. You are always my most beloved daughter. I know. Ji-won's nose felt sour. She raised her hand to rub it, trying not to choke. She knew that Ji Hongwen had deliberately chosen this day to make things clear to her. Fortunately, there had never been any deep estrangement between father and daughter. Between people, the most terrible thing was to say nothing. Ji Hongwen said a few more words before hanging up. Jin Wan held her phone and stood by the window, looking out for a long, long time. Who was her biological father? Perhaps she would never meet him in this lifetime. Even if they met, the other party wouldn't know of her existence. When her mother was young, she was a very quiet and gentle woman. Jin Wan was too young to know much about her mother's past, but she really couldn't figure out how she could have been forced to marry someone before she got married. What kind of coercion was it? Was she forced to marry by force, or was she forced to marry by her elders? Or were there other possibilities? Ji Hongwen clearly did not intend to talk about these things. He only called to comfort her and tell her that nothing would change between them. He wanted to keep her as his daughter, and Jin Wan also wanted to keep the family she had lived in since she was young. Professor Lin's class only lasted for 3 months. This class ended before T University's graduation season. Although the short 3 months was not as long as other people's years, Jin Wan could be considered to have made a friend like Bai Wei. On the eve of their departure, the students in Professor Lin's class had a rare gathering. Although Feng Ling was a transfer student, she went along. Jin Wan did not drink. She sat on the sofa and chatted with Bai Wei. She talked about her experiences in the past 3 months and the possibility of working with Bai Wei's company in the future. Feng Ling had never participated in such an occasion before. She only occasionally looked at her phone and watched Jin Wan, not allowing her to drink. This class had a simple beginning and a simple ending. However, the process was exciting. Ling Feifei kept avoiding Jin Wan and sat far away from her. Feng Ling would occasionally raise her brows and glance at Ling Feifei, intentionally using her gaze to scare her. Ling Feifei was so frightened that she quickly used the excuse of feeling unwell to slip away. She did not dare to stay any longer. Jin Wan left T University with the results of her final test. The next day, she packed her luggage with Feng Ling in the condominium. Mo Jingshan said that he would pick her up and bring her back to High City today. She did not know if he would fly directly to T City or return to High City first before coming over. Jin Wan did not have much luggage, but it took her a long time to pack. She waited from dawn until afternoon, but Mo Jingshan did not appear. For the entire day, she did not receive any calls from Mo Jingshan. What time is it? Jin Wan locked the 2 suitcases and stood up, clapping her hands as she asked Feng Ling in the living room. It's past 5, Feng Ling replied. Only then did Jin Wan notice the passage of time. She turned to see that it was already evening and picked up her phone to look at the time. There were only messages from Xia Tian and Xiao Ba on her phone. They asked if she was returning to High City today or tomorrow and said that they wanted to arrange a welcome banquet for her. Her messages were bustling with activity. Many people had sent her various messages. However, there was no news from Mo Jingshan. Time passed bit by bit. 6 o'clock. Mo Jingshan did not appear, nor did he call. 7 o'clock. There was still no sign of Mo Jingshan. At 10 o'clock, her phone was silent. There was no sound of anyone opening the door. Jin Wan tried to call Mo Jingshan, but all she heard was a cold, robotic female voice indicating that the other party was not in the service area and could not be reached. Chapter 277. If Mo Jingshan was too busy to fly here these days, Jin Wan could fly back to High City herself. But why didn't he call her? Jin Wan waited until midnight, but there was no news. She thought maybe Mo Jingshan was on the plane back from abroad and the flight was a little long. She didn't get a call or a person, so she had to take a shower and go to sleep. The next morning at 6 o'clock, suddenly, Feng Ling's cell phone rang. Jin Wan heard her cell phone ringing. Although it was not her cell phone, she sat up abruptly. Feng Ling was sleeping in the guest room next door. When Jin Wan pushed the door open, she was already answering the phone, but her expression was serious and deep. Usually, Feng Ling rarely showed her joy on the surface. In an instant, Jin Wan instinctively felt something was wrong. After answering the phone, Feng Ling put down the phone and looked up at Jin Wan, who was standing at the door of the guest room. Mrs. Mo, Why did you get up so early? Feng Ling fixed her eyes on her, and after 2 seconds of silence, she asked calmly. I couldn't sleep. I heard some noise here, so I came to have a look. Jean Wan walked in and opened the curtains for her. She asked casually, who called so early in the morning? A brother who used to work at 11 base. Feng Ling's eyes were hidden in the morning light after the curtains were opened, and she looked at the time. So Mo must be busy and can't come for the time being. Let's go to the airport now and return to High City today. Jean Wan's hand paused on the curtains, and after a moment of silence, she turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling, tell me the truth. Did something happen? Feng Ling didn't answer and got out of bed. Let's have breakfast first. Mr. Mo said you must eat on time every day. Shall we order takeout or call the aunt to cook? Anyway, I don't know how to cook, and I don't think you can eat the food I cook. Tell me the truth. No matter what happens, I shouldn't be the one being kept from you. Jean Wan stared at Feng Ling's back and raised her voice, not giving her a chance to avoid it. Feng Ling paused and turned to look at Jean Wan. Mrs. Mo, I believe Mr. Mo will come back. All you have to do now is to return to High City safely. What happened to him? Hearing the words, I believe Mr. Mo will come back, Jean Wan's heart sank instinctively. Feng Ling would not easily say such words. Feng Ling looked at her for a moment and said, Mr. Mo flew to Cambodia a few days ago. It's not peaceful there recently, and there are some gangsters lurking around there. Mr. Mo has lost contact with our people, and we can't find his location or signal. We only know that a group of border arms dealers also went there before the accident. I don't know if they met. Jean Wan stared at Feng Ling calmly. It took her a long time to digest her words and understand them in her heart. A gang that had a grudge in the United States? Mo Jingshan was a member of the Mo family. His foundation was so stable, and his business history had always been clean. There was no need for him to have any connections with the underworld. What exactly did he do in America in the past? Why would he go to Cambodia? Danger lurks in every corner of that place, and every step is dangerous. Landmines can be seen everywhere. The whole world knows about this. What's he doing there? Mrs. Mo, I'm sorry. When Mr. Mo comes back, he will answer you in person. It's not convenient for me to say too much. Feng Ling answered softly, but please believe me, as you said, Mr. Mo has always been clean. He has no dark history, but many years ago in the United States, the situation is a bit complicated. Although he didn't personally involve himself in the underworld, in the eyes of the gangsters and the competitors of 11 Base, Mr. Mo's life is worth tens of billions. They won't kill him easily, but if they really set up an ambush, they won't let him go easily. So you mean he can't come back now? Feng Ling paused and looked at her. Mr. Mo is missing. The people of the base have now gone to search and rescue, but no one knows what happened to Mr. Mo. He had lost contact with the signal before the accident. What are you talking about? It's impossible. He said he just went abroad on a business trip. Jean Wan suddenly turned back to the bedroom, picked up her cell phone, and called Mo Jingshan. Sorry, the number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable. Please try again later. Jean Wan frowned slightly and continued to call Mo Jingshan's other numbers. She called his work cell phone number, his private cell phone number, and the cell phone number that he didn't use often. His cell phone was either turned off, unavailable, or not in the service area. Seeing Jean Wan still on the phone, Feng Ling went up to her. Our people have gone to find him. Mr. Mo will definitely come back safely. Mrs. Mo, let's go back to High City first. I'll go back with you. Jean Wan tried to calm down and looked up at her. He asked me to wait for him to come back. He said he would come to pick me up after returning to China. Mo Jingshan never breaks his promise. I'll stay here and wait for him. He may be on the plane back home, or he may have landed at the airport of T-City. I'll wait for him. Feng Ling wanted to persuade her, but seeing that Jean Wan was obviously restraining all her emotions, she knew she couldn't push her too hard at this time, so she said, Okay, then let's wait. I'll wait with you. Jean Wan didn't speak anymore. She just sat on the sofa holding her cell phone, but her eyes were fixed on the door. Half an hour later, there was a sudden movement outside the door, and then the doorbell rang. Jean Wan stood up abruptly and walked quickly to the door. The moment she opened the door, her face lit up with joy, only to see that the person standing outside was a very strange middle-aged man. "Miss, this is the breakfast takeout you just ordered." The middle-aged man smiled politely at her and handed her 2 bags with lunch boxes in them. Jean Wan's expression froze in an instant. Feng Ling walked out quickly, took the takeout, paid the money, and took Jean Wan back into the room, closing the door. "This is the takeout I just ordered. Mrs. Mo, you can wait here if you want, but you have to eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You can eat." Jean Wan walked back to the sofa and sat down. "This is Mr. Mo's order. You have to eat breakfast." "I'm really not hungry." Chapter 278. Jean Wan took another look at her and had to get up, walk to the dining table and sit down. Feng Ling opened the bag and took out the soybean milk and steamed buns from the lunchbox. "I knew you probably didn't have an appetite, so I bought 2 kinds of steamed buns with stuffing. One is beef and onion, and the other is vegetable zucchini and egg. You have to eat some." Jean Wan didn't speak, took a sip of the soybean milk, and took a bite of a steamed bun. As soon as she took a bite, a very fragrant and strong taste of beef filled her mouth. Jean Wan suddenly felt nauseous, stood up, rushed into the bathroom, and retched against the toilet. "Mrs. Mo?" Feng Ling was startled. She put down the cutlery in her hand and stood up to follow. She saw that Jean Wan did not vomit much, but her stomach was obviously uncomfortable and she kept retching. She rushed to pour a glass of water and handed it to Jean Wan when she stood up. "Why do you suddenly feel nauseous? Where do you feel uncomfortable? Do you want to see a doctor?" Feng Ling stared at her with concern. "I'm fine. I've often had stomach discomfort since I first came to T-City. Maybe I was too nervous just now." Jean Wan rinsed her mouth, washed her face with cold water, and returned to the dining table. Looking at the steamed buns, she really had no appetite, and the beef filling was even more disgusting. It was fragrant and clean, but it was disgusting. She didn't want to eat the steamed bun with vegetable filling either. In the end, she only drank half a cup of soybean milk, and then covered her stomach that kept tossing and turning, saying, "I really can't drink any more. If I drink any more, I'll probably throw up." Seeing that Jean Wan really couldn't eat or drink, Feng Ling saw her drink half a cup of soybean milk and didn't force her. "Then go back to the bedroom and lie down. I'll buy you some stomach medicine, okay?" "No, I'll be fine in a minute. Let's talk about it when we go back to High City." Jean Wan returned to the sofa and sat down, which was facing the door, stubbornly sitting there and looking at the quiet door. From morning to afternoon, Mo Jingshan didn't appear. Jean Wan leaned against the sofa, holding a pillow, and picked up her cell phone again to make a call. His cell phone was still turned off, and no one answered. She let out a long breath and looked at the quiet door. "Mrs. Mo, is your stomach better now?" Feng Ling avoided the topic of Mo Jingshan and sat by her side to ask softly. Jean Wan didn't answer. After a long silence, she said calmly, "Feng Ling, let's go back to High City." Feng Ling paused, looked at Jean Wan's calm face, and nodded. "All right, I'll book a ticket." Jean Wan did not speak anymore. She leaned against the sofa and looked up at the apartment she had lived in for 3 months. From the apartment to the airport, from boarding the plane to landing in High City, Jean Wan did not say a word. When she walked out of High City Airport, a silver-gray Porsche was parked outside. It was obviously here to pick her up. When Jean Wan came back, she didn't call a car, nor did she tell the Ji family and the Mo family which flight she was taking. Why was there a car to pick her up? She turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling said, "It's not convenient to inform the Mo family about Mr. Mo's matter now. I called Dr. Chin before boarding the plane and told him that your stomach was not feeling well this morning. I was worried that you might get airsick today, so I asked Dr. Chin to find time to come over. He's not busy today, so he drove directly to the airport." "Chin's sighting?" Jean Wan paused and did not say more. As soon as she walked to the side of the car, the driver's door was opened. Chin's sighting was not wearing the white hospital gown but only a light-colored shirt and trousers. After getting out of the car, he glanced at her and still had that sloppy smile on his face. He raised his eyebrows at her. Oh, Mrs. Mo, you've returned from your studies. Your temperament seems different. You have the posture of a future business manager. In the future, if those old men in the Chin family's company compete with your studio for business, I'm afraid they won't be able to defeat you, Mrs. Mo. Dr. Chin, you're so busy in the hospital, but I still asked you to come to pick me up. I'm sorry to trouble you. Jin Wan nodded politely at him. What trouble? Put the luggage there. Get in the car. Chin Siding did not say more. He gestured for Jin Wan to get in the car and walked around the car to carry their luggage to the trunk with Feng Ling. Jin Wan originally wanted to carry the luggage herself, but the two's movements were nimble and quick. Her hands were empty, so she did not insist and directly sat in the back of the car. Seeing that Jin Wan was obviously not interested, Chin Siding closed the trunk behind her and glanced at Feng Ling. She knows everything? Feng Ling answered, I can't hide too much, but Mrs. Mo seems calm. I just don't know how she is feeling right now. Calm? Chin Siding snorted. It would be strange if she's calm. But it's indeed a good thing that she doesn't make people worry on the surface. At this time, if she can't even control her own emotions, who can help her? In this world, only Mo Jingshan can completely take care of all her emotions and feelings. Now that Mo Jingshan is not here, she can only rely on herself. As he spoke, Chin Siding walked to the side of the car and knocked on the back window. Jin Wan lowered the window and turned to look at him. Dr. Chin. Feng Ling said that you vomited after eating a bite of the bun this morning. What happened? It's all right. I'm fine now. Anyway, it's on the way back to the U Garden. We'll pass by our hospital on the way. I'll take you to the hospital for a checkup first. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just go straight to the U Garden. Chin Siding did not pay any more attention to her. He opened the front door and sat in the driver's seat. Feng Ling also sat in the car and turned to look at her. It's good to go to the hospital for a checkup. Otherwise, I'll really be worried. She just vomited a little. What was there to be worried about? In the past, when she vomited, Jin Wan thought she was pregnant. Now, she did not even consider this possibility. So what? At most, her stomach would feel uncomfortable. Jin Wan did not say more. After all, Chin Siding came to pick her up. If he wanted to take her to the hospital first, she would go to the hospital first. She could not force him to send her back to the U Garden. She could not get out of the car halfway, so she could only follow them. In the car, Chin Siding glanced at the time. As he drove, he glanced at Jin Wan through the rearview mirror. He will come back. Don't worry too much. Nanheng has already sent people over. There are dangers everywhere in that kind of place. Right now, we can't be sure if he was ambushed or something else. Don't panic. Jin Wan was silent for a moment and then said, I don't even know what he used to do in America. I don't even know where to panic. What else can I do? Chin Siding snorted. The ignorant are fearless. This is a good thing. The ignorant are fearless? You mean the situation is more dangerous and urgent than I thought? Jin Wan looked up at him. Chapter 279. When they arrived at the hospital, Chin Siding motioned for Feng Ling to accompany Jin Wan to have a blood test. It was already past 9 o'clock in the evening, and the doctors in the hospital had already left work. Only a few doctors on duty were surprised to see Chin Siding enter the door in casual clothes. Usually, Dr. Chin rarely came to the hospital during his rest time. But because of Chin Siding, the doctors on duty quickly did several tests for Jin Wan. Finally, when Jin Wan walked to Chin Siding's office with several test results, she suddenly heard Chin Siding's voice coming from his office. Still no news? He has been missing for a day. According to his character, this kind of thing can't happen. There must be something unexpected. We'd better find him within 24 hours, or I'm afraid his life will be in danger. Hearing these words outside the door, Jin Wan paused her hand on the door and did not immediately push it open. Then Chin Siding's tone softened a lot. I'll take care of him at home. Jin Wan has arrived in High City. She is calm. Feng Ling will accompany her. Then he gave some instructions. When Jin Wan knocked on the door, Chin Siding hung up the phone. Have the results of the tests I asked you to do come out? Qin Siding turned his eyes to Jin Wan, who came in. Jin Wan nodded, walked over, and handed him the test results, asking, "What do the HCG values on them mean?" Qin Siding hadn't seen the page she was talking about. The moment he heard Jin Wan's words, he raised his eyebrows and abruptly pulled out the page. He glanced at it and then looked up at Jin Wan. "When was your last period?" She couldn't treat Qin Siding as Mo Jingshan's best friend. He was a doctor. It was normal for him to ask this kind of question. "About a month ago." As soon as she answered this, Jin Wan's expression suddenly froze. Her period should have come 2 days ago, but it was 2 days late. She was usually very punctual. "A positive HCG value means that you are pregnant, Mrs. Mo." Qin Siding looked at her with a smile in his eyes. Jin Wan looked at him in surprise. "What? Your HCG value is very standard. It's neither too high nor too low. It should be able to rule out ectopic pregnancy. I'll go to the obstetrics and gynecology department later. If there's no problem, your vomiting is just a reflection of early pregnancy." Qin Siding glanced at her other test results, turned to the computer, and helped her register for the gynecology and obstetrics department. He then turned to look at her, only to see that Jin Wan was standing there as if she had not reacted. "What are you standing there for?" He raised his eyebrows. "I'm really—" Jin Wan looked at him in disbelief. "Pregnant?" Qin Siding glanced at her with a smile. "Do you think the laboratory in the hospital is a decoration? You haven't been pregnant for long. Judging from the time when your last period ended, it's only about 3 or 4 weeks. We can only find out through a blood test, but you're indeed pregnant. I just went to the hospital for a checkup more than 3 weeks ago. At that time, I was prescribed a lot of traditional Chinese medicine because my uterus was cold. Of course, you couldn't find anything 3 weeks ago. You're pregnant from the last period, and the traditional Chinese medicine to warm the uterus worked on you. Besides, during the period when you took the traditional Chinese medicine, you and Mo Jingshan should have slept together more than once." Jin Wan. Indeed, they slept together more than once. Relatively speaking, they slept together very frequently, so just when she thought it might take a long time for her to conceive a child, she happened to be pregnant in those few days? It was a joy that she should be excited to share, but at this moment, there was no one around to share it with her. After Jin Wan went to the obstetrics and gynecology department, she did several related tests and finally confirmed that she was indeed pregnant, and it was early pregnancy. Because of the cold uterus, her body was more sensitive, and the pregnancy symptoms came earlier than most people, and her morning sickness was more serious. When Jin Wan walked out of the clinic, Feng Ling looked at her with concern. "Mrs. Mo, are you really pregnant?" Yes, she was really pregnant. But where was Mo Jingshan? Where was the father of her child? She left the hospital and returned to the Yu Garden. As usual, Auntie Chen came out to welcome her. When she saw that it was Jin Wan, she immediately called the other servants to help her with her luggage and accompanied her upstairs, asking her how she had been in T-City in the past few months. It had only been 3 months, but it seemed that nothing had changed. The Yu Garden was still the warm Yu Garden, and Auntie Chen was still the enthusiastic Auntie Chen. The furnishings in the bedroom hadn't changed, and her wardrobe hadn't changed much since she left. "Mrs. Mo, why did you choose to come back at this time? It's already midnight. Are you hungry? Do you want me to make you some supper?" Auntie Chen smiled. "No, it's late. Auntie Chen, go to bed first. We'll talk about it tomorrow," Jin Wan replied gently, then walked to the window, opened it, and looked out at the falling snow. It was early winter when she left. It didn't seem to snow at that time, but now the 2,000 square meter garden and swimming pool in the Yu Garden were covered with pure white snow. Auntie Chen thought that Jin Wan was too tired and sleepy after a day's flight, so she didn't dare to disturb her and went out. Feng Ling waited outside the door and didn't enter the bedroom until Auntie Chen left. "I'll stay in the Yu Garden to accompany you. There are many guest rooms here. Call me if you need anything. You've been tired all day. Go to rest." Jin Wan's voice was very light, and she stood in front of the window without moving. The room was quiet again. Jin Wan looked out of the window for a long time until the winter wind was cold. She closed the window and turned back to the bed. The moment she sat down, she lay down. The quilt seemed to still have Mo Jingshan's smell, which was enough to prove that he would come back to the Yew Garden to stay after finishing his work in the company before going abroad. Jean Wan turned over on the bed, buried her face in the quilt, and took a deep breath. It was very light and clean, as if Mo Jingshan was lying next to her. She was sleepy but didn't want to sleep. Jean Wan picked up her cell phone and texted Mo Jingshan. Jean Wan, you said to wait for you to come back. You said you would take me back to High City. Jean Wan, Mo Jingshan, you can't break your promise. Jean Wan, where are you? The text message was sent out like a stone sinking into the sea. Both her and Mo Jingshan's cell phones had been read and unread settings. After half an hour, she didn't receive a read receipt from these text messages. Jean Wan's nose turned sour. She had just put down her cell phone when all of a sudden, the phone in her hand vibrated. Chapter 280. Jean Wan abruptly lowered her head to look at the number displayed on the screen. The moment she saw it was really Mo Jingshan's number, she jumped up from the bed and quickly picked up the phone. Hello. The call went through. Jean Wan could hear the sound of the call being connected, but it was very quiet on the other side of the phone. She could vaguely hear the sound of breathing, which seemed to be a little far from the phone. Hello? Jingshan. Jean Wan clenched the phone. Where are you? Beep. The call was suddenly cut off in less than 5 seconds. Jean Wan froze and looked at the phone again. The call had been hung up. The total time of the call was 4 seconds. For some reason, Jean Wan's heart suddenly beat faster. Staring at the short call record, she suddenly rushed out of the bedroom, ran to the door of the guest room where Feng Ling was, and began to knock hard on the door. Feng Ling thought something had happened. When she opened the door, her sharp eyes glanced outside, but when she saw Jean Wan's expression as if something urgent had happened, she subconsciously walked out and looked behind her. What's wrong? What happened? Call, Feng Ling, Mo Jingshan just called me. Jean Wan pointed at the phone. Just now, a minute ago. Feng Ling looked at her in surprise and suddenly took her phone. Sure enough, she saw the call record. After a moment of hesitation, she decisively turned back to the room to pick up her own phone and make a call. Jean Wan followed her in and saw that Feng Ling had informed her of the call Mo Jingshan had just made to her. Then Feng Ling's phone suddenly received a software that Jean Wan had never seen before. Feng Ling connected the phone to the computer, installed the software, and quickly took the phone in her hand and connected it to the computer. Jean Wan stood aside and stared at the white map on the black screen of the computer. On a small map below, there was a striking red dot that flickered bit by bit until the red dot signal gradually weakened and disappeared. The moment Feng Ling saw the red, she made another call. I found Mr. Mo's location a few minutes ago. He is in the area about 5 kilometers east of Tunnel Sap Lake in Cambodia. The coordinates are accurate, and the signal has disappeared again. After the call, Feng Ling raised her eyes to look at Jean Wan. Thank you for your quick reaction. Before Mr. Mo's cell phone signal was blocked again, we found his last signal. Now our people will be there soon. Mr. Mo will come back safely. Jean Wan looked at the small map on her computer screen that no longer had a red. It was indeed a map of Cambodia. He called just now, but he didn't say anything. He hung up after a few seconds. Are you sure he's safe? Jean Wan stared at Feng Ling's face. If he's safe, why did he suddenly call me without saying a word? Why did the signal disappear so quickly? Mr. Mo's current location is a minefield. It's a place that even the Cambodian government can't control. That place is occupied and surrounded by drug gangs from various countries all year round. It's covered with a shielded network. No signal can be displayed there. Mr. Mo suddenly called you. Is it because you did something? Before Feng Ling could finish, Jean Wan glanced at her cell phone again. The 2 messages she had sent to Mo Jingshan earlier showed that they had been read. I sent him a message and he saw it. Jean Wan raised her eyes to look at her. Feng Ling took her cell phone again, looked at it, and said, maybe Mr. Mo happened to leave the shielded network when you sent the message, but now we're not sure where he will go or where he will be taken. We have to find him immediately. Now we have people in Cambodia. Trust me, Have a good sleep tonight and wait for our news. Rest assured? How could she rest assured? Jean Wan pretended to be calm and didn't bring too much pressure to Feng Ling. She just turned back to her room with her cell phone. Mrs. Mo, leave your cell phone with me. If Mr. Mo can still keep in touch with you, I can check the signal immediately. All right. Jean Wan gave her the cell phone and walked out of the guest room. When she returned to the bedroom, Jean Wan looked at the empty room where she was alone. Her ears seemed to be echoing with the faint breathing sound that seemed to be a little far away in the 4 seconds when she picked up the phone. What kind of circumstances did he make this call under? Jean Wan leaned against the door, closed her eyes, and tried to hold back the tears that were about to burst out. She couldn't think too much about it. Since he could see her text message, since he could call her, it proved that he was still alive. In a place like Cambodia, he was still alive. He would be safe. Jean Wan returned to the bed, but she kept hearing the quiet, shallow breathing sound on the other side of the phone. At night, the cold wind rustled outside the window. Jean Wan turned over but still didn't fall asleep. It's before dawn, Jean Wan, who hadn't been able to fall asleep, suddenly heard something outside. She lifted the quilt and got up. She walked to the bedroom door and was about to open it when she heard a low voice outside. Miss Feng, there's a car outside looking for you. They specially told us not to wake up Mrs. Mo. It was Auntie Chen's voice. Got it. Feng Ling's voice was low. I may not be here for a few days. Take good care of Mrs. Mo and ask 2 more people to accompany her. Don't let her wander around. It's best to let her stay in the U Garden and wait for our news. Are you going out? Why are you in such a hurry? What happened, Miss Feng? Nothing, but Mrs. Mo is pregnant now. Remember not to let her wander around. Yesterday, she was found to be pregnant in the hospital. Recently, she needs all kinds of nutrition. It's already so late. I'm going out. Hurry up and make breakfast for her. Feng Ling's voice was low. Mrs. Mo is pregnant? God, I didn't know it until now. Mrs. Mo didn't mention it when she came back last night. Okay, I'll go prepare the pregnancy supplements for her right away. Okay, the car outside this morning. Don't tell anyone. When Mrs. Mo wakes up and finds I'm gone, just say that I went out to deal with something and will be back soon. Don't let her worry. Okay, I understand, Miss Feng. Then there was the sound of the 2 of them walking down the stairs at the same time. Occasionally, Auntie Chen asked about Jean Wan's pregnancy, and Feng Ling basically answered every question. When the 2 of them had gone downstairs, they could no longer be heard. Where was Feng Ling going? She had specially said these words. Obviously, she wouldn't stay in High City for a while. Chapter 281. Jean Wan decisively put on her clothes and followed her out. When she went downstairs, Feng Ling had already gone outside the U Garden. Auntie Chen happened to enter the kitchen at this time and didn't see Jean Wan, who came downstairs at this time. Mrs. Mo? The other 2 servants didn't know what Feng Ling had told them. Seeing Jean Wan come down, they greeted her eagerly. Jean Wan signaled them not to make a sound, and while Auntie Chen didn't notice her, she quietly went out. The servants were a little confused, but Jean Wan was the hostess of the U Garden after all. No matter how careful and sneaky she was when she went out, they didn't dare to ask. Jean Wan hid in the yard of the U Garden and saw Feng Ling get into the black car outside the gate. When the car drove away, Jean Wan took a look at the direction it left, turned around, and glanced at the other cars in the garage. Feng Ling had always been very sensitive. If she rashly followed it, she would soon be discovered. Half an hour later, with the excuse that the Ji family had some friendship with the leaders of the High City Traffic Police, Jean Wan asked them to help track the road and direction of Feng Ling's car. Finally, she confirmed that the car went straight to the airport after leaving the U Garden. Jean Wan decisively drove to the airport. When she arrived, she was half an hour behind the car in front of her. After entering the airport, she took out a pair of sunglasses large enough to cover half of her face from her bag and put them on. Then she raised her collar high to cover her chin and a small part of her face. She quickly looked around the crowd and went straight to the passage that international flights needed to pass. Sure enough, Feng Ling was going abroad. From a distance, Jin Wan saw Feng Ling was applying for boarding passes with several people dressed in black. Jin Wan glanced at the flight number displayed on the counter and checked it with her cell phone. It was a direct flight from Hai City to Cambodia in 2 hours. Jin Wan stood far away from the crowd. After Feng Ling and those people entered the security passage, she quickly walked to the counter, asked if there were any extra seats on this flight, bought a ticket for the same flight, and then quietly passed the security check and entered the first-class lounge. Feng Ling and those people bought business economy class tickets and were in the lounge outside, which happened to be a distance away from the lounge where Jin Wan was. Jin Wan looked out and could clearly see the crowd walking back and forth outside, but from the lounge outside, she couldn't see what was going on inside. "Hello, do you need anything to drink?" A staff member in the lounge came over and asked eagerly. Jin Wan looked out again and saw that Feng Ling had bought a few bread and mineral water casually, which was enough to show that they were really in a hurry. Jin Wan waved her hand to show that she didn't need it. She didn't make any sound. After all, Feng Ling was too sensitive. She was worried that she would be discovered if she made any sound. The staff member didn't ask any more and put the standard fresh fruit plate and some delicate biscuits in the lounge here. While waiting, Jin Wan took into account that she was pregnant, so she simply ate some fruits and biscuits. Before the boarding notice, while Feng Ling got up to go to the bathroom, Jin Wan quickly walked out. Because she was in first class and because she was pregnant, she could board the plane first. She didn't have to wait in line and successfully avoided Feng Ling's sight. During the 5-hour flight, Jin Wan stayed in the first-class cabin and didn't go to the back. When the plane landed smoothly at the Phnom Penh International Airport in the capital of Cambodia, she couldn't hold back the morning sickness that she had endured for several hours. When everyone was lining up to go out, Jin Wan suddenly retched and raised her hand to cover her mouth. At this time, a flight attendant passing by noticed her situation and specially asked her to get off the plane first. Feng Ling and the others were walking in the front and happened to stop in the first-class cabin. Hearing the conversation, Feng Ling glanced to the side from the corner of her eyes. She suddenly froze and turned to look at Jin Wan, who was quickly putting on her sunglasses. Feng Ling, slow down." Jin Wan was pulled all the way from the exit of the airport to the departure hall by Feng Ling. She held her wrist tightly and couldn't break free. Feng Ling walked and said seriously, "It's too dangerous here. You can't follow me. Go back to Hai City immediately. There is a direct flight back to Hai City this evening. Go back directly. Mo Jingshan is here. I can't go back unless I see him standing here safe and sound in front of me today. I won't go back. Mrs. Mo. Feng Ling, I won't make trouble or hold you back, but if you were me, would you stay in Hai City at ease?" Feng Ling's expression stiffened. Her gaze softened, and she softened her voice. "I'm not afraid of you causing trouble. Although the capital of Cambodia appears to be safe, the overall situation in this country is not very optimistic. The area around Tunnel Sap Lake is a place where landmines, guns, and drugs coexist. Not to mention that you're pregnant. Even if you weren't, you shouldn't come here." Jin Wan didn't speak but just looked at her. Seeing Jin Wan's eyes, Feng Ling frowned. "I know you can't wait in Hai City at ease, but Mrs. Mo, this place is completely different from the life you are used to in China. Do you understand the essential difference between peaceful coexistence and bloody killing? But Mo Jingshan is here." Jin Wan's voice was not loud, but every word she said was firm. Feng Ling looked at her for a long time, and her frown slowly relaxed. It seemed that she couldn't bear to drive Jin Wan away, but she really couldn't let her stay in such a dangerous place. "Mr. Mo won't want you to step into this kind of place, and you have to protect your child. There may be a war here at any time," Feng Ling said softly. "Although I should listen to you, please listen to me this time and go back, okay?" Jin Wan looked at her quietly and didn't say anything more. She turned her eyes to the sky outside the airport. She was now standing on the same land as Mo Jingshan. She didn't want to make things difficult for Feng Ling. In the morning, when she came here, she just wanted to make sure if Feng Ling was really coming to Cambodia. At that time, she was already at the airport, and the documents in her bag happened to be with her. Jin Wan just wanted to be closer to Mo Jingshan when she couldn't find him, so she flew here. But if Feng Ling was too difficult for her, Jinwan certainly didn't want to cause trouble for her. But she wanted to see Mo Jingshan as soon as possible. At least when she was sure he was safe, she could stand directly in front of him. "What's the matter?" All of a sudden, a cold voice rang not far behind Feng Ling. Hearing the voice, Jinwan immediately raised her eyes and looked at Nan Heng, who came in from the airport entrance. Chapter 282. Nan Heng moved his eyes away from Feng Ling's face and glanced at Jinwan. Jinwan had always known that Nan Heng's background was not simple. He was an arms dealer in the United States and had such a powerful 11 base behind him. The power he possessed was not something ordinary people could understand. It was truly unfathomable. But Nan Heng was usually good at talking. It was the first time that Jinwan saw him not wearing a shirt and trousers but a black suit like Feng Ling's. This black suit was very uniform and seemed to be from 11 base. He was still cold and handsome, and because of this black suit, he looked cold and mysterious. "What are you doing here?" Nan Heng raised his eyebrows coldly. "Mo Jingshan is here." Jinwan looked straight at him and said calmly. Nan Heng looked at her for a while and then glanced at Feng Ling. "It's not easy for me to get on the plane and follow you here under your nose." Feng Ling. He was obviously making fun of her, but Feng Ling's expression was cold and she couldn't laugh. "It seems that in terms of bravery, Jinwan is definitely not as good as you, but in terms of wisdom, I think Jinwan may be a little better than you." Jinwan, Feng Ling, the brothers who came with Nan Heng. In this world, only boss Nan Heng dared to belittle Feng Ling like this. After all, Feng Ling had been in the base for so many years and made so many achievements. How many raids and missions had been completed by Feng Ling's quick thinking and decisiveness? In terms of wisdom, Feng Ling had stayed in the base for so many years but had never been found out that she was a woman. Wasn't boss Nan Heng, who had been in contact with her the most stupid one? Feng Ling coldly turned her head away from Nan Heng and said flatly, "I'll have Kay send Mrs. Mo back." "She's already here. How can we send her back? She landed in High City today and will find a way to fly back tomorrow morning. At that time, I'm afraid Mo Jingshan will not be the only one missing." Nan Heng said coldly, "She's trying to avoid our sight and stay in Cambodia, or standing in front of us safely. Which one is more worrisome?" Feng Ling frowned. "But it's too dangerous here. Before she flew here, she knew better than you that she would face many unknown dangers. She is not a child. She has made her own choices, and she has the ability to accept and bear them. What are you worried about?" Nan Heng said and looked at Jinwan. "We don't have much time. Go back to High City or stay here. I'll give you one last choice." "I'll stay." Jinwan did not hesitate. Feng Ling frowned. "But Mrs. Mo, you're pregnant." Hearing the word, pregnant, Nan Heng abruptly glanced at Jinwan and then at her stomach. Jinwan raised her hand and placed it on her flat abdomen, her tone gentle. "I'll protect myself." "But," Nan Heng raised his hand to indicate for Feng Ling to shut up. He then glanced at the time and asked the other brothers and Feng Ling to leave first. Finally, he looked at Jinwan and asked solemnly, "Jinwan, are you afraid of death?" Jinwan looked into his eyes. "No." "Afraid of death? How could a person who had died be afraid of death?" If it were anyone else, their eyes might flicker when they answered this word, but Jinwan's eyes were so firm that Nan Heng couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Finally, he snorted, picked up a cigarette, put it in his mouth, narrowed his eyes, and turned his head. "Follow me." With that, he turned and left. In such a place, no one would spare time to take care of Jinwan's physical condition and feelings. There were no rich young ladies or rich wives here. If she had the ability to keep up with everyone, she would follow. If she couldn't, she would go back to High City. Even if Nan Heng didn't say this, Jinwan understood what he meant. She didn't say anything and quickly followed him. Nan Heng and his men had been stationed near Tunnel Sap Lake in Cambodia for a day and a night. As the most mature member of the base, Feng Ling was bound to participate in this operation, so she suddenly left High City and flew straight to Cambodia. When Jinwan got out of the car, She saw the large warehouse and bulletproof sheds the base had temporarily rented here. Jean Wan finally understood what Feng Ling meant when she said they were not in the same world. As a person living in a peaceful world, the most she heard about was 11 base related to Feng Ling. She knew something about arms trafficking, but she had never been involved in these things. However, at this moment, when Jean Wan saw that almost all these people had a gun on their waist, and each of them looked serious and wore the same black uniform, Jean Wan's heart suddenly jumped. The warehouse has been divided into some compartments. Let Feng Ling take you in to have a rest first. Nan Heng simply said to Jean Wan and left her alone. As the two of them walked in, from time to time, some people looked at Jean Wan up and down. Among these people, there seemed to be no woman except Feng Ling, and when they saw a woman appear, their eyes were obviously surprised. This is Mr. Mo's wife, Jean Wan. Feng Ling briefly introduced her as she passed by the people holding guns. In an instant, the people's eyes changed from surprise to respect. They nodded to her kindly and pointed inside. The third room inside is the cleanest. Jean Wan found that these people seemed to have a special kind of respect for Mo Jingshan. What's the relationship between you and Mo Jingshan? Jean Wan asked as she walked into the room where she was temporarily arranged. Since they had come here, Feng Ling knew that Jean Wan would know it sooner or later. She pondered for a moment and then said in a low voice, "Needless to say, Nan Heng's identity is the behind-the-scenes boss of the American underground arms business." Although Mr. Mo didn't participate in the underground arms business, he tried his best to save Nan Heng and his secret arms channel and the lives of all the people in 11 base. To put it simply, Mr. Mo was the behind-the-scenes manipulator of the American underground arms business. He held the secrets behind these arms dealers, and he crushed the enemy again and again with his decisions and judgment that caught the enemy off guard. He was the most trusted and respected person by all of us, and also the person whom the enemy hated the most. That's why I said that day that Mr. Mo's head was worth 10 billion in the eyes of those people. Jean Wan was confused. Why didn't I notice this? Because Mr. Mo didn't personally involve himself in the underworld. He only helped us in the past few years. He has always been a very pure Mo family member, and he really didn't need to involve himself in the underworld to open up his business. It's just that Mr. Mo's brain is too much for those people to hate. After all, any decision of Mr. Mo's can make those people lose billions overnight, and even face the danger of being besieged by the police, because a large part of the American police force has connections with Mr. Mo. So in this trip to Cambodia, someone must have specially set up a heavy ambush for Mr. Mo. Even the signal was blocked in such a timely manner. Clearly, it was specially targeted. And it was precisely because the person they were targeting was Mr. Mo that they were so cautious. Chapter 283. When Feng Ling walked out of the warehouse, Nan Heng was deploying a search and rescue plan outside. The moment the group of brothers saw Feng Ling, they all glanced at her. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a woman before?" Nan Heng turned to glance at her because of their gazes and then coldly stared at the others. "Everyone, I've never seen such a woman Feng Ling." In fact, Feng Ling didn't change much. She still had short hair and was dressed in black, but now she didn't need to wear a corset and loose clothes to hide her figure. After staying by Jean Wan's side for a long time, she didn't look as rough as she used to when she stayed in the base with a group of men all year round. Her skin looked much fairer than before, and even her eyes were not as cold and sharp as before. Nan Heng frowned coldly and glanced at Feng Ling indifferently. "What are you standing there for? Did I ask you to come here to be admired? Come back." Feng Ling calmly moved her eyes away from his face and expressionlessly walked into the crowd. Cambodia, formerly known as Khmer, was located on the Indochina Peninsula, bordering Thailand in the west and northwest, Laos in the northeast, Vietnam in the east and southeast, and the Gulf of Siam in the south. The mirror showed the Mekong River and Tunnel Sap Lake, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. The capital, Phnom Penh. This was one of the least developed countries in the world. It was also one of the most difficult countries to control public security in the world. Cambodia should be cooler in December, but this year, the winter here was as hot as summer. In the dense forest near Tunnel Sap Lake, it was even more sultry. Mosquitoes, snakes, ants, and poisonous tropical insects often passed by because of the humidity. This was the second day Jinwan arrived in Cambodia. Most of the members of 11 Base brought by Nan Hung lived in a large warehouse cubicle outside the dense forest, and some of them were on duty in the bulletproof shed outside every day and night. There wasn't much food here, so they could only occasionally go to the barren village across the river to exchange money for rice and noodles. The dishes were all kinds of dried vegetables, dried meat, and dried fruits that they had brought before they came, which they cooked in boiling water and ate. After a day of searching, they had identified the location of the underground drug gang deep in the forest. Everyone was ready to go, waiting for Nan Heng's order to rush in and encircle those people. However, the only thing they could not confirm was whether Mo Jingshan was still in this area. Feng Ling explicitly forbade Jinwan from leaving their sight. Although Jinwan stayed in Cambodia as she wished, the only place she could move was between the warehouse and the bulletproof shed, and further away was an area guarded by their men on the edge of the jungle. Mrs. Mo, you ate dried meat and fruits all day yesterday. Today, our people caught some fish and shrimps from outside. We plan to grill some freshwater seafood nearby. You should go and eat some fish. You need nutrition every day. When Feng Ling pushed the door open, she found that Jinwan had tidied up every compartment in the warehouse. Jinwan insisted on doing something. She didn't want to be the one who would only be a burden and needed to be protected, so Feng Ling agreed to let her clean up. However, she didn't expect that in just one morning, Jinwan had cleaned up all the 20 or 30 compartments. Even the socks that the brothers had taken off were gone. Feng Ling turned to see that there was a long line outside the back door of the warehouse. The pairs of socks had been washed and hung there. Why did you even wash the socks? Feng Ling moved the corner of her mouth and looked at Jinwan's hands. Did you wash them by hand? Of course. You came in such a hurry and didn't bring any daily necessities. Did you expect there to be a washing machine here? Jinwan said as she swept the floor. The ground was covered with various tropical insects that had been killed by pesticides. Fortunately, they had brought a lot of pesticides. Otherwise, these insects from the jungle were likely to climb onto their beds. Jinwan was the daughter of the Ji family in High City. Whether before or after marrying Mo Jingshan, she should have never done these kinds of chores. Not only did she clean up the house and sweep the floor, but she also washed so many pairs of socks by hand. Mrs. Mo, you don't have to do anything. Mr. Mo is the most respected and important person to us. You should enjoy preferential treatment here. You don't have to do these things. If I don't do something to keep myself busy, my heart will only be more chaotic. Are you worried about Mr. Mo? Jinwan tightened her grip on the broom and looked up at her. Although I'm worried, I believe in you and believe that he will be fine. Feng Ling smiled at her. They won't be willing to take Mr. Mo's life. If Mr. Mo doesn't hand over the confidential information of the underground arms trade, they won't dare to touch him for the time being. We've confirmed his location and just need to wait for the right time. Jinwan nodded. I know. You can go ahead. You don't have to accompany me. I'll find something to do. Let's go eat the fish. They are already grilling it. Jinwan thought for a while, swept the door, washed her hands, and went out with Feng Ling. The people in this base were indeed a group of young and strong men, who could be described as rough men. Most of them had been fighting in the wind and rain for a long time, so they were very simple and capable. Grilling fish was just grilling fish. They didn't put any oil, salt, or seasoning, and even if they did, they didn't know how much to use. No one knew how to cook, so these 2 days, they could only cook some rice and eat some jerky they brought with them. Jinwan took a basin of fresh fish back to the warehouse. An hour later, the men in the base smelled the steamed fish and all stuck their heads out to sniff in the direction of the warehouse. When Jinwan took out the stewed fish and gave it to everyone in disposable bowls, the brothers all stared at Jinwan in shock. Mrs. Did you make this? Yes, have a taste. Jinwan smiled faintly and continued to take out bowls for everyone. When Feng Ling and Nan Heng heard the news and rushed over, they saw this scene. Jinwan gave a bowl to each of the brothers and carefully soaked the hard-boiled rice in fish soup for everyone. Nanheng took a bowl of soup from a man next to him, took a sip, raised his eyebrows, and glanced at Jinwan. Chapter 284. Jinwan walked over. I think everyone must have eaten well in America. These 2 days, we've been too perfunctory. Since we can catch fish in the river, we can buy staple ingredients and seasonings from the village. Together with the various jerky you brought, as long as we cook them properly, they can all become good meals. Jinwan walked over. So you stayed in Cambodia to cook for us? Nanheng looked at her with a faint smile. Why can't I? Jinwan asked. Nanheng raised his eyebrows. Are you sure you can bear this grievance? A man in the base next to him sipped fish soup and said, Mrs. Mo washed all our socks this morning. There should be nothing more grievance than washing dozens of pairs of socks. Nanheng's eyes were fixed on Jinwan. I think we'd better let Mo Jingshan run his own course. Don't save him, he suddenly said indifferently. Jinwan abruptly glanced at him. What do you mean? If we save him and let him know that his wife is here to cook for us and wash our socks, I'm afraid the consequences won't be good, Jinwan. She ignored him and turned back to the warehouse to continue scooping fish soup, saying as she walked, When you went to buy staple food and dry food, you brought back too little salt, so the fish soup may still be a little bland. Remember to buy some oil, salt, and seasonings when you go to buy them today. With that, she went straight into the warehouse. Nanheng stood still and turned to look at Feng Ling. Sure enough, there has never been a woman in the base. It's so rare to have a woman. It really feels different. Feng Ling was expressionless. As long as you're not afraid of being poisoned to death, I don't mind cooking for you when we return to the base. Nanheng glanced at her with a fake smile. There is an American one-star chef in the base. Do you think we need you to show off your skills? But we do need a woman for this field operation. Feng Ling turned to leave, but her wrist was suddenly held. Her eyes turned cold, and she turned her head to look coldly at the big hand on her wrist. Let go. Does it still hurt? Nanheng asked in a low and indifferent voice. Feng Ling's gaze instantly became even sharper. She was about to hit him away when the brother who was still slurping the soup by the side looked at the two of them in confusion and asked, What? Does it still hurt? Feng Ling was injured? It was probably not a small injury for our cold-faced boss to ask about it personally, right? Feng Ling, where are you hurt? Nanheng raised his leg and kicked him in the shoulder. Get lost. You're everywhere. The little brother was so frightened that he turned around and hid in the bulletproof shed with the bowl in his hands. He didn't know why boss was so angry. Only he was allowed to care about Feng Ling, but they couldn't? I told you to let go of me. Feng Ling's expression turned cold. She struggled to break free from Nanheng's grip. Nanheng pinched her wrist effortlessly and looked at her from the side. Behave yourself, huh? Get lost. Feng Ling was impatient and raised her leg to kick him. Jinwan had just scooped out another bowl of fish soup when she heard strange noises from the jungle. The brothers who came to help her carry the bowl lowered their voices and said, Mrs. Mo, don't go there. Boss and Feng Ling are fighting. Don't hurt you. Jinwan began to think about the meals of these rough men in the base. In addition to the staple food she bought and the fish and shrimp that could be fished out of the river, she also went to the edge of the jungle to look for edible vegetables. There were mushrooms everywhere, but no one was sure which ones were poisonous and which ones were not, so no one had come to pick them. Jinwan specially used her cell phone to check the classification of mushrooms and edible plants in this tropical jungle, and then carried a bamboo basket she bought from a family in the village into the jungle. For safety, Nanheng specially asked Feng Ling and Kay to accompany her in the jungle. Mrs. Mo, is this kind of mushroom okay? Kay was very tall and was said to be the best at close combat in their base. He was very upright and obedient, and he was very warm to Jinwan. Jinwan had just picked a small wild vegetable and put it into the bamboo basket. When she looked back and saw the mushroom in Kay's hand, the corner of her mouth twitched. This is poisonous. Kay looked embarrassed, threw the mushroom away, and continued to follow her. Feng Ling beat back and forth in the grass with the bamboo pole, driving away all the insects and snakes that could get close to her, so that Jinwan could safely pick food here. At about 8 o'clock in the evening, the night was as dark as ink, and the stars hung in the sky. Everyone had a sumptuous dinner tonight, so some of the brothers ate too much and ran back and forth to the other side of the jungle to relieve themselves. Jinwan chatted with the brothers in the base for a while and then got up to go out. Feng Ling walked with her along the river, talking along the way, but Feng Ling obviously avoided the topic about Nanheng. When the two of them came back to themselves, they were already hundreds of meters away from the base. The two of them were about to go back, when suddenly Feng Ling's eyes paused, and she turned her eyes in the direction of the narrow, dark river in the distance. Jinwan also turned her head and saw a glimmer of light coming from the dark gap over there, flickering through the dense watergrass. "Are they the fishermen in the village over there?" Jinwan asked in a low voice. Feng Ling's eyes were cold, but she took Jinwan's hand and took a step back, saying calmly as if nothing had happened, "I think so. Let's go back first." However, just as the two of them were about to leave in another direction, suddenly there was a faint voice not far away. It seemed that they were speaking the local language of Cambodia, which Jinwan couldn't understand. When Feng Ling heard their conversation, she quickly pushed Jinwan behind the grass by the river and warned her in a low voice, "Squat here and don't come out." Weren't those people fishermen? At this time, two shadows jumped down from the opposite river, and Feng Ling had rushed over quickly. Jinwan was puzzled, and as Feng Ling said, she squatted down reflexively, hid behind the waist-high grass, and was about to pick up her cell phone to call Nanheng to inform him. However, holding the cell phone in her hand, she paused again. Although she was hiding in the grass and wouldn't be found, once her cell phone screen lit up, in such a dark place, she would definitely attract those people's attention. If she was found, Feng Ling would only be in the way to protect her. But now there were only the two of them here, and those people obviously came prepared. If Feng Ling dealt with them alone, she was afraid that something would happen. Chapter 285. A few minutes later, Feng Ling came back, panting with blood on her face. She rushed into the grass where Jinwan was, but Jinwan was nowhere to be seen. "Mrs. Mo?" Feng Ling frowned. "Jinwan." Her low voice was scattered in the wind. The river of Tunnel Sap Lake in the distance was calm and dark. No one responded. Only a cell phone was left in the grass, lying there quietly. She was kidnapped. This was the first thought that came to Jinwan's mind when she woke up. And it turned out that she was indeed thrown on the ground. The room was so dark that she could barely see light. The air was damp, salty, and full of the smell of decay. She tried to move, but her wrists had been tied behind her back, and so were her legs. In just a few seconds, before Jinwan could react, there was a conversation outside the door, but she couldn't tell what they were talking about. Jinwan took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. She rolled her eyes and looked around. It was a very common wooden house in Cambodia. It was very empty and there was nothing in it. A kerosene lamp hung above his head, and the weak kerosene light was almost non-existent. There were moths clinging to the lampshade, casting a huge shadow on it. It looked very creepy and scary. Just as Jinwan was wondering who had kidnapped her, the door was suddenly pushed open from the outside with a bang. Seeing the two wretched-looking, dark-skinned men, Jinwan instinctively shifted back, pressing her back against the wooden wall. Her clear eyes stared at them warily. When she saw that they were holding a skinned, dead snake in their hands, she resisted the urge to vomit and gritted her teeth to prevent herself from making a sound in fear. Two people came in. One of them was carrying the snake, and the other was a short, fat man holding a gun of poor quality. He took a look at her, grinned, and turned to talk to the man holding the snake. They spoke in Cambodian, which Jinwan couldn't understand, but seeing their smiles, Jinwan pressed against the wall tightly. It would be a lie to say that she was not afraid. Finally, the short, fat man suddenly came over, squatted down in front of her, looked at her, and touched her face with his fat and dirty hand. Jinwan didn't think and turned her head away. The pudgy man suddenly cursed in a low voice, still in a language that Jinwan couldn't understand. He raised his hand and was about to slap her. Just a second before the slap fell, a stooped old woman of about 60 or 70 years old suddenly came in. The old woman coughed, and the two men immediately stood up and looked back at the old woman. Although they didn't look at her respectfully, they took a step back politely and didn't continue to say anything to Jean Wan, nor did they continue to be presumptuous. The old woman came in with a water ladle in her hand. She stared at Jean Wan for a while, walked over, got some water out of the ladle, and sprinkled it on Jean Wan's face. Under Jean Wan's confused look, she wiped her hand hard on her face until all the dust and dirt were washed off. Then she looked at her carefully for a while and said to Jean Wan. It was still Cambodian. Jean Wan was worried that these people might be related to the recent incident. Once the fact that she was a Chinese was discovered, she might face more danger. She closed her mouth, pretended to be scared, and shook her head, meaning that she didn't understand. The old woman thought for a while and asked in broken Chinese, "Are you Chinese?" Jean Wan still shook her head blankly. Her mouth was not stuffed so she could speak, but she still hummed, meaning that she was mute. The old woman thought she looked like a standard Asian beauty, but she couldn't tell which country she was from. After all, Asians mostly looked and had similar habits. After looking at her for a while, seeing that Jean Wan was still humming, she pointed to Jean Wan's mouth and asked her with her eyes if she could speak. Jean Wan hummed again and nodded hard. It turned out that she was mute. The old woman took another look at her, turned around, and said a few words to the two men in Cambodian. The two men reluctantly came over and pulled Jean Wan up. Jean Wan didn't understand, but seeing that they were helping her up and walking out with the old woman, she calmed down and let them help her out. When Jean Wan was taken out of the cabin, her eyes were suddenly covered with a black cloth. She couldn't see anything and could only be carried in an unknown direction. When they arrived, the two men put her down. Finally, the old woman came over and helped her untie the black cloth. Then she looked down at her for a while, pointed to the dense forest, and made an expression as if her hands would explode. She meant to tell Jean Wan that if she ran out casually, she would step on a minefield at any time and be blown up. Jean Wan immediately understood that this should be the center of the dense forest where Nan Heng and his men were going to encircle, and the area where the group of people were currently stationed. She had actually been brought here by accident. Could Imo Jingshan be here? Jean Wan controlled all her facial expressions and didn't show any flaws. She didn't look around but kept her eyes on the old woman in front of her. The old woman untied the rope around Jean Wan's feet and took her to the largest cabin in the middle. When they got inside, they saw several middle-aged and young people in the cabin. When they saw the old woman bring Jean Wan in, they all stared at Jean Wan vigilantly and angrily scolded the old woman in Cambodian, as if complaining that the old woman brought strangers in. After talking to them for a while, the old woman pointed to Jean Wan's body, meaning that she was clean and had no dangerous things on her. Then she took Jean Wan's hand and sniffed it carefully. After saying something, the men stared at Jean Wan suspiciously. One of them was a middle-aged man in his 50s with gray hair, a square face, a lion's nose, and a scar running from his eyebrows to the left side of his face. He looked at Jean Wan coldly and suddenly asked her in English, "Can you cook?" It turned out that the old woman smelled the seasoning on her hand and thought she was a cook. Jean Wan still pretended that she didn't hear anything and just looked at the man with fear and confusion. The middle-aged man continued to stare at her coldly and asked in English, "Which country are you from? How did you get brought in by our men? There's no smell of guns or bullets on your hand, only the smell of food. Who on earth are you?" Jean Wan looked helplessly at the old woman beside her and hid behind her in panic. At this time, there was a sudden noise outside the cabin, and an alarm sounded in the forest. Chapter 286. The middle-aged man with a scar coldly glanced at Jean Wan, turned his head, and said a few words in Cambodian. Several people in the cabin suddenly rushed out and went outside to investigate the situation. A few minutes later, those people ran in. Obviously, not all of them were Cambodians. Most of them were gangsters from all over the world. When they came in, their words were mixed with Cambodian Khmer, and sometimes they were mixed with some English that was not particularly fluent. However, Jinwan could roughly tell that these people referred to the middle-aged man with the knife scar as Akib. Furthermore, their tone was very respectful. It seemed like this Akib was the boss of this group. Even if he wasn't the boss, he was definitely a senior figure. Finally, she had some idea of what was going on from the mixed English. The nearby fishermen went hunting in the woods and stepped on a minefield. They had been blown away, so the alarm was sounded. The people of 11 base outside the woods haven't moved yet. Akib's face darkened. Ignoring the man who had just come in to report, he turned his eyes to the two men who followed him in. Was this woman caught by you? The two men hurriedly answered respectfully, yes. Akib was displeased and frowned. What happened? The short fatty hurriedly said, this woman was not with the people of 11 base, but she was sneaking around Tunnel Sap Lake. We suspected that there was something wrong with her, so we knocked her out and caught her. 11 base never allows women to enter. Did you find out why she came? Where did she come from? The short fatty was embarrassed and hesitated for a long time before he said, it seems that she is a tourist from a village near Tunnel Sap Lake. In the past 2 years, there have been a lot of tourists from all over Cambodia. This woman is white and clean, and she has nothing to do with 11 base. She may have been caught by US by mistake. Akib snorted coldly, bent over in a chair, took a look at Jinwan, frowned, and asked the old woman a few words in Cambodian. The old woman took Jinwan's hand and said a few more words to him. He was still suspicious about Jinwan's mute, but he still looked at her unkindly and suddenly gave a cold order. Suddenly, someone came over and dragged Jinwan away and took her out. The result of bringing him out was a body search. Those thick-armed, dark-skinned men dragged her into a tent and were about to tear off her clothes. She struggled desperately in fright. At this time, the old woman came in, glared at them, and said a few words, and they reluctantly left. The old woman came to search Jinwan in person. After she was searched from inside to outside, the old woman looked at her with satisfaction, helped her put on her clothes, and untied the rope in her hand. Jinwan's hands and feet were completely free, but she couldn't rush out of this place. Her intuition told her that the old woman seemed to think she was useful, so she protected her. Since he couldn't escape, he could only wait and see. As Jinwan expected, the old woman seemed to be an aunt brought by Akib. She had been taking care of Akib's gang for many years. She usually cooked, delivered water, and mended clothes for these people. Although her job was similar to that of a nanny, because she was old and careful enough, she was trusted by these people, so they respected this old woman. The old woman was in poor health and didn't have the strength to work. Seeing that Jinwan could cook, she asked Jinwan to cook and wash clothes with her. After Jinwan stayed here for one night, the old woman took her to Akib's place the next day. At that time, Jinwan had been forced by the old woman to change into a fluffy white dress that women in Cambodian farms often wore, and this dress had no pockets from top to bottom. She didn't know what the old woman was saying to Akib in Cambodian, but from the looks that Akib and his men suddenly cast at Jinwan, the old woman suggested that they keep Jinwan here to work and send someone to keep an eye on her at all times to make sure that she wouldn't do anything to threaten them. The old woman should have also mentioned that Jinwan was a beautiful woman who could cook, and they wouldn't suffer losses if they kept her here. The way those people looked at Jinwan made her more and more unbearable. Jinwan still lowered her head and didn't speak, as if she couldn't read their expressions or understand anything. She just held the food that she had just cooked with the old woman, put it on the table, and then lowered her head, clutching her white dress as if she were very scared and nervous. She was so quiet as if she didn't exist and wouldn't disturb them. Unlike his men who were staring at her with scorching eyes, Akib still looked at her coldly and suddenly said in English, "Keep her alive for now. Let her work here. Dolly, follow her from now on. If she makes any suspicious movements, kill her." The young, strong, dark-skinned man named Dolly nodded. Akib could have said this in Cambodian, but he said it in English. It was obvious that he was talking to Jinwan. This man's suspicion hadn't been dispelled. It seemed that it wouldn't be easy for Jinwan to get out of here. Jinwan still lowered her head as if she hadn't heard anything. After tasting the food cooked by Jinwan, Akib suddenly looked at her thoughtfully for a while, turned his head and said to his men in English, Mr. Control hasn't eaten for 3 days, has he? Ask her to bring food to Mr. Control. It tastes good. Maybe he will eat it. Who was Mr. Control? Jean Wan subconsciously felt that Akib, who could be described with the code name Control, couldn't be simple. The old woman obviously didn't expect that Akib, who was so distrustful of Jean Wan, would ask Jean Wan to bring food to that man. She asked in confusion. Akib glared at her and turned his head to order, "Dolly, take her to bring food to Mr. Control." Dolly nodded and signaled Jean Wan to follow him out with his eyes. Jean Wan didn't know why, but now she had to obey his orders to save her life. She went back to get the food she had prepared, carefully put it on the tray, and then followed Dolly all the way to a particularly hidden area behind the dense forest. Until they came to a seemingly very sturdy cabin guarded on all sides, Dolly looked at her coldly, opened the door, and let her in. Jean Wan walked in with the tray. The cabin was also a little damp and musty, but as soon as she stepped in, she suddenly smelled the familiar scent of grass and trees. Chapter 287. She froze in an instant, raised her eyes subconsciously, and looked into the cabin. There was a man standing in the cabin, with his back to the door and his face to the window, which was nailed with dozens of thin steel bars. Through the gap of the steel bars, he stood there silently, looking out of the window. A pair of black Italian handmade leather shoes came into her sight. Compared with the careful care they used to have, the shoes now looked a little old, stained with mud and a little dark red blood. His leg was as straight and slender as ever, wrapped in black trousers. His black handmade shirt was a little wrinkled, which seemed to hide some blood, but it was almost invisible because of the color of the shirt. But even in such a situation, the man just stood there quietly, still clean, handsome, noble and indifferent. And absolutely lofty. Such a lofty air was not as unreachable as when he was in a high position in the business world. Instead, he was like a wisp of pure air that could not be contaminated by mud. No matter what evil and filth entangled him, he could still wash away the filth and be invulnerable. He was standing there, and he was still him. Mo Jingshan, he was really here. Jean Wan's mouth moved subconsciously, but because the man named Dolly was behind her, only about a meter away from her, he would immediately notice any unusual attitude or action she made now. If that happened, not only would she die, but Mo Jingshan, who was safe and sound for the time being, would also be implicated. She silently put the tray and food in her hand on the table in front of the door. Seeing the man in front of the window standing there coldly without looking back, she secretly gritted her teeth and didn't make a sound. Dolly stood right behind her, watching her every move. Seeing her put down the dishes, Dolly suddenly said in English, "Mr. Control, we caught a woman, and her cooking is more in line with your Chinese taste. You haven't had a drop of water or a bite of food for 3 days and 3 nights. Please don't fight with us like this, Mr. Control. If you die, the secrets of the arms trade may not be kept." The man in front of the window didn't look back as if he didn't hear him. It turned out that Mo Jingshan was the one they called Control. Seeing that Mo Jingshan didn't respond, Dolly was not in a hurry. He sneered and said in English, "Mr. Control, I don't know whether the woman we just caught is from China, Japan, or other Asian countries. She is very beautiful. Akib's plan is to let her work here first, and when the operation is over, we will give her to our brothers to enjoy. If Mr. Control likes, Akib may let you touch her first. This woman is still clean." Jean Wan kept her head lowered. When she heard his words, she clenched the empty tray in her hand and stared at the food on the table. Had he not eaten or drunk anything for 3 days and 3 nights? How did he get through it? But unfortunately, this woman is mute, Dolly added. The man in front of the window was obviously annoyed by Dolly's noise and turned his head. The moment Mo Jingshan turned around, Jean Wan's heart jumped to her throat. The man in front of the window also raised his eyelids when he saw her. His indifferent eyes swept over her and finally fell on the white dress she was wearing. His eyes were extremely calm, as if he were looking at something unimportant, as if he had never seen it before. His handsome face was calm, but there was a moment of deepness in his eyes, as if there was a veil of coldness in them. However, this emotion only flashed by, and no one caught it. Even Jinwan's heart tightened under his cold gaze. If she hadn't been sure that he was indeed Mo Jingshan, she would have suspected that he was someone who looked exactly like him, someone who didn't know her at all. She just glanced at him quickly and looked away. When Mo Jingshan looked at her, his eyes were judgmental, unscrupulous, and even cold. "Get out," he said in a clear voice. It was a sentence in English that was easy to understand. Jinwan shivered all over and felt that all the hair on her body was about to stand on end. Dali narrowed his eyes, looked at Jinwan, who had been silent, and then looked at Mo Jingshan, who seemed to be very strange to this woman he had just caught and was as cold and distant as ever. Dali finally dispelled his suspicion of Jinwan. "Mr. Control, why do you want to kill yourself? Ordinary people would have been lying in bed without any strength after 3 days of hunger, but Mr. Control, you can fight us to the end without eating, drinking, or sleeping. But no matter what, you are immortal. How long can you last? 1 day? 2 days? Or 10 days? Dali said with a sneer. Mo Jingshan was indifferent. Dali smiled coldly again and pointed to the food on the table with his eyes. Are you sure you don't want to eat? The food this woman cooks is really delicious. Mo Jingshan was expressionless. He glanced at the food on the table in the corner and said coldly, "Did she cook it?" Hearing the hidden meaning in his words, Dali immediately looked warily at him and Jinwan, who had been standing there quietly. Mo Jingshan came over, stopped by the table, raised his eyelids, and looked at Jinwan again. "Where are you from?" Jinwan pursed her lips and said nothing. Dali chuckled. "I told you she is a mute. Her skin is so white. I guess she is either from China or Japan or Korea." Mo Jingshan gave an ambiguous smile. "Mute? What? Mr. Control, you don't believe me?" Dali suddenly reached out and pinched Jinwan's arm hard. Jinwan bit her lip in pain but didn't make a sound. She turned her eyes away with a pale face and didn't look at Mo Jingshan's expression. She was afraid that if her eyes met his, she would be exposed. Dali pinched her while watching Mo Jingshan's face. Mo Jingshan didn't even look at Jinwan. He said, "Akib knows me better and better. He knows that I don't like you good-for-nothings, so he sent me a mute." Dali immediately glanced at him. Mo Jingshan said coldly, "Unfortunately, I'm not interested." Dali froze and moved his hand away from Jinwan's arm. Before he spoke, Mo Jingshan raised his hand slightly and mercilessly knocked over the food on the table. The food and soup spilled all over the floor. He didn't even look at them and turned around coldly. Obviously, he was extremely tired of them. Chapter 288. As soon as the door of the cabin was closed, Jinwan's heart sank to the bottom, but at the same time, hope rose. Mo Jingshan was still alive. A moment ago, he was standing in front of her. Although Mo Jingshan's attitude was unbelievably cold, Jinwan more or less knew his keenness and decisiveness. If he had shown any trace of a relationship with her just now, she would have been killed by Dali's gun in an instant. But now that she finally found him, she couldn't even say a word to him and had to suffer his indifference. Even the food was knocked over. Jinwan felt a little depressed, but more because she heard that he hadn't eaten anything for 3 days and 3 nights. Dali walked out with a cold face. Obviously, he was annoyed by Mo Jingshan's attitude. He turned back and urged Jinwan to go faster, his tone very unkind. Jinwan followed him quietly, getting farther and farther away from the cabin where Mo Jingshan was, and she didn't look back. Mo Jingshan's attitude was very obvious. Here, whether it was him or her, any carelessness could lead to serious consequences or even death on the spot. He was already careful, so she should be more cautious. No matter whether she could save him or not, she should at least not hold him back. Jinwan certainly didn't know that since she left the cabin, there were more than a dozen guns pointed at her in the dense forest around her. Once she looked back or looked at the cabin, she would be shot to death. The old woman was still waiting in Akib's cabin. Hearing the noise outside and seeing that Jinwan had come back safe and sound, she immediately said a few words in Cambodian to Akib, who had been expressionless, with a happy look on her face. Akib obviously didn't expect that Jin Wan was really not sent to rescue Mo Jingshan. Although he still looked at Jin Wan with cold and sharp eyes, he no longer paid attention to her. He waved his hand and motioned the old woman to take her out first. Jin Wan followed the old woman out and glimpsed some small white flowers around. These flowers were not common in China, and she could still smell their strong fragrance from a long distance. If she remembered correctly, this should be the national flower of Cambodia, Lundu flower. Seeing that Jin Wan had been looking at these flowers and seemed to be interested in them, the old woman took her over with a smile, bent over, picked a few flowers, and handed them to her. Jin Wan looked at the old woman in surprise, pointed to the flowers, and then pointed to herself, meaning that she could take these flowers? The old woman nodded and was about to speak, but remembering that she didn't understand, she just smiled, put the flowers in her hand, and took Jin Wan back to the cooking tent. Although this old woman was respected by the people here, she was actually a servant who was responsible for washing and cooking. She lived in a very simple and damp cabin next to the cooking tent, and then she asked Jin Wan to live with her. Because she had seen Mo Jingshan today, Jin Wan was a little relieved, so she behaved more prudently and listened to the old woman's arrangements. After entering the tent, the old woman found a white dress for her to change into, and then gave her a very thin quilt. It could be seen that this old woman had no companion all year round. It was not easy to meet a young girl in a place full of wild men. She really hoped that Jin Wan wouldn't be killed by these people and hoped that Jin Wan could stay and help her cook. In the evening, Jin Wan and the old woman were busy preparing dinner and sending it to Akib's room. Every time Akib saw Jin Wan, he would stare at her for a while. Jin Wan kept her head down. If she was too calm, it would only arouse suspicion, so her hands holding the bowl were trembling faintly. She looked helpless and pitiful, as if she was very afraid of everyone here. The short fat man who had caught Jin Wan was also in this room. Seeing her come in, he suddenly smiled and turned to Akib and murmured something in Cambodian. Akib ignored him, but a man next to him suddenly said in English, "This woman's skin is really white, which is rare in Asia. It's like the snow I saw on the snowy mountains. Her face is also very small, and her eyes are big and bright like stars. She has a good figure, slender waist, and plump buttocks. She's so sexy." Then the people in the room suddenly began to speak in English. Some of them were very proficient in English, and some spoke poorly, but at least Jin Wan could understand them. They were all infuriating erotic words that were extremely unpleasant to the ears. They could have spoken Cambodian, but they chose to speak English. It was clear that they were still testing her. Jin Wan had been standing beside the old woman with her neck shrunk, as if she hadn't heard anything, and still looked scared and timid. Then suddenly someone next to Akib said, "There are a lot of farms near Tunnel Sap Lake, and there are many women, but it's really hard to find such a white and tender woman. We haven't had a good time in a long time because of Mr. Control. If this woman serves us well for a few days, when the operation is over, we can just throw her on the bed to satisfy our cravings." The room instantly roared with laughter. The men's gazes on Jin Wan became even more unkind. They could no longer be described as simply wretched. Jin Wan's heart chilled and she felt disgusted, but she still hid behind the old woman timidly. Then these people saw that she really didn't seem to hear them, so they switched back to Cambodian. After dinner, Akib suddenly said in English while wiping his mouth, "Dolly, ask this woman to continue to send food to Control. Tell him that if he refuses to eat, it means that the food this woman cooks is not to his taste. She is a waste, and it's useless to keep her alive. If he doesn't eat, we'll kill her." Jin Wan felt a chill on her back. Hadn't Akib finished testing her? No matter whether Mo Jingshan ate the food she sent or not, she would face a dead end. Now even if she resisted by committing suicide, she would still face a dead end, and she might even implicate him. Dolly quickly agreed, grinned, and said, "Okay, I'll ask her to go right away." With that, he came over, stood in front of Jin Wan, and glanced at her coldly. Without speaking, he just signaled her to go out with him with his eyes. Chapter 289. Seeing her like this, Dolly muttered something that Jin Wan couldn't understand. She guessed that he must have said something like, trouble, or something like that. Jinwan went to the cooking tent. Outside, Dolly kicked over the kettle set up outside the tent, telling her with his eyes to hurry up. He was very impatient now. Jinwan nodded at him. Most of the people here were ferocious. She had to be careful with every step she took and not offend them easily. Dolly looked at her coldly from outside the tent. Jinwan shrank inside, holding a small bowl, filled herself with soup with trembling hands, and then carefully took a sip. Seeing that she was really hungry, Dolly stopped looking at her and let her drink, but he still urged her in an impatient tone. Jinwan pretended not to hear him and glanced out from time to time as she drank the soup. When Dolly went to the cabin next door to grab a cigarette from another man's hand to smoke, Jinwan quickly stirred the pot with her hands. Looking at the bubbling soup in the pot, she suddenly made up her mind and knocked over the pot with her hands. In an instant, the hot soup splashed out and drenched the backs of her hands and wrists. She screamed in pain, fell back and plopped to the ground. Hearing the noise, Dolly rushed back in an instant, lifted the curtain of the tent and looked in, only to see that the pot on the fire had been knocked over and spilled all over the ground. Jinwan sat on the ground, trembling in pain, and the back of her hand was instantly scalded with blisters. The blisters were so red that it was unbearable to look at. Dolly immediately cursed outside, walked in, grabbed Jinwan by the collar, and pulled her up without mercy. Jinwan was almost dragged out of the tent by him. When he came out, he was about to kick her when the old woman happened to come back at this time. She shouted and hurried over to rescue Jinwan from his hands. She looked at Jinwan's hands with distress and asked her a lot of questions, as if she was caring for her and blaming her. Jinwan really didn't understand this time. She could only try to make herself look particularly pitiful, innocent, and scared. She looked at the old woman with red eyes full of tears, scared and aggrieved, raised her blistered hands, pointed to her stomach and mouth, and then to the bowl on the ground in the tent. The old woman knew that she hadn't eaten much since she was caught yesterday. Seeing that Jinwan's hands were so scalded, it was difficult for her to move, let alone deliver food. After the old woman said a few words to Dolly, he looked at Jinwan coldly with displeasure, obviously not intending to let her go. Akib asked her to deliver food to Control, but in the blink of an eye, her hands were scalded like this. Whether it was a coincidence or she did it on purpose, this woman couldn't be left alive now. The old woman had been defending Jinwan, so Dolly turned around with a cold face, went back to the cabin where Akib was, and reported the situation. The old woman helped Jinwan up and kept speaking Cambodian. It seemed that she was distressed about Jinwan's hands and asked her what was going on. Jinwan didn't make any sound but followed her into the shabby cabin next to her with her head down. Now the back of Jinwan's hands hurt badly when they were touched, and the scalded places felt like they were on fire. The old woman came over with a needle, pressed her hands forcibly, and pricked them one by one. Jinwan trembled all over with pain, but she bit her lips hard. This time, her eyes were not red because she pretended to be afraid and wronged, but because of the pain, and tears welled up in her eyes. She had never suffered such heart-wrenching pain in her 2 lives, and her lips were bleeding from biting. Afterward, the old woman brought over some kind of medicine, which seemed to be a plant powder exclusive to Southeast Asian countries. It was gray and white, and she sprinkled it on the back of her hand. Then she cut off a strip from the bottom of Jinwan's white dress, wrapped it around the back of her hand and wrist, and patted her hand, indicating that she should rest tonight and not go to work. Jinwan nodded gratefully to the old woman. Out of the instinct of an innocent person who was caught, Jinwan pointed to the outside of the jungle and looked at the old woman eagerly, meaning that she wanted to know when she could leave here. The old woman looked at her sympathetically, but shook her head. There were only 2 ways to go after being caught and brought to such a place. Either she had to take care of these people all year round like she did, or she had to die. There was no way she would be let go. It didn't take long for the old woman to leave the room. Jinwan sat inside and waited until the old woman was far away before she got up and moved her wrist with some difficulty. The pain made her more aware of the situation she was facing now. She stood in front of the window and looked out. This was a camp made up of many wooden huts, grass huts, and tents. It was in the deepest part of the forest and was surrounded by greenery. It was not a small area, and her vision was blurry in the dark. She could not see the specific appearance of the huts, only their outlines. There was a fire in the middle of the clearing, and a circle of people surrounded it. They were holding wine and meat, eating, drinking, and laughing loudly. From time to time, they would cast sharp glances in her direction. It was as if the matter of throwing her onto the bed to have a good taste of her in Akib's hut had been officially put on their agenda. Jean Wan's heart grew colder and colder when she saw the guns on their waists. This was not a peaceful country at all. There would never be such a place in China, but this was Cambodia. In the next few years, many international rescues were related to the civil strife in Cambodia. Whether it was the Mekong River or the Tunnel Sap Lake, there had been countless accidents. 10 years ago, the security here was even worse than 10 years later, and the peacekeeping situation here was not as good as it would be 10 years later. If she wanted to leave, she could only save herself. Outside the dense forest, Fong Ling changed into a tight-fitting black outfit, with 2 silencer guns on her waist. She was squatting down to tie her shoelaces, and at the same time, she put the dagger shining with cold light into the sheath next to her boots. "What are you doing?" Just as she was about to tie her shoelaces and get up, suddenly, a dark shadow appeared in front of her, and a pair of black leather boots stopped in front of her. She didn't need to look to know it was Nan Heng's voice. Fong Ling didn't look up. She fixed the dagger by her boots, touched the gun at her waist, stood up, and looked expressionlessly at the cold man in front of her. "Jean Wan has been taken away for a day and a night. I have to go in to find her." Chapter 290. Fong Ling's eyes were cold. "She was caught when she was with me. Whether from Mr. Mo's point of view or from the point of view of me as her bodyguard, the responsibility is on me. Even if I'm smashed to pieces, I must bring her back safely." "I'm afraid that you won't be able to find her even if you're blown up," Nan Heng scolded. "Mr. Mo has the secrets of the arms dealers. Those people have been afraid of the pressure Mr. Mo exerted on them, so they don't dare to do anything to him, but Jean Wan is different. She doesn't know those people and doesn't know how bloodthirsty they are. It's normal for them to kill people without blinking, not to mention that she is pregnant. It's because she is pregnant. With Jean Wan's IQ, she should be able to see the pros and cons of this place. If she has a child, she will better protect herself. If you rush in now, you'll just be hitting a stone with an egg." Nan Heng said coldly, "I know you are more anxious than anyone else because of Jean Wan's accident. You two have developed a very good relationship after getting along with each other for so long, but Fong Ling, remember, you are a member of 11 Combat Base. Have you forgotten the rules of the base?" Fong Ling looked at him coldly and said nothing. "Don't be impulsive. That's the first rule." Nan Heng abruptly kicked her calf. When Fong Ling was about to dodge, he reached out and snatched the 2 guns from her waist. He spun them in his hand and then put the guns into his own waist. "Do?" Fong Ling glared at him. "Just stay here and wait. If it weren't for the minefield in this jungle, I would have gone in long ago. Why are you so anxious here?" Nan Heng said expressionlessly, "I've informed the domestic border rescue team and the SWAT team in the United States who used to be on good terms with Mo Jingshan. They'll be here soon with a helicopter. Just wait patiently, En. We also have helicopters. I can drive in myself." Fong Ling frowned. "Bullshit." Nan Heng directly scolded her. "How many years has it been since the people inside fought against our base? Why haven't they been wiped out? Now that they have the ability to ambush Mo Jingshan, it is enough to show that they have set up layers of ambushes here, just waiting for the people from our base to enter. If you fly in now, before you can land on the airdrop to rescue him, you will be shot down by the people below. After so many missions, you have always been the calmest and most cautious. This time you can't calm down?" Fong Ling pursed her lips and frowned. "If you can't calm down, go back to High City and wait for news. You're not needed here." Nan Heng scolded coldly again. After confiscating her gun, he ignored her and turned to leave. Looking at his cold and tall back, Fong Ling suddenly took a step forward and reached out to snatch the gun back, but Nan Heng pressed her hand on his shoulder and threw her up. Feng Ling kept attacking him fiercely, but Nanheng just looked at her coldly and expressionlessly, raised his hand to block, and only defended. In the end, he clasped her wrist and suddenly pulled the short-haired woman into his arms. Seeing this, Feng Ling immediately began to struggle in his arms, and Nanheng lowered his head and bit her hard on the neck. "You're the one who's going to die? Let me go!" Feng Ling trembled in pain and shouted hoarsely. Hearing the noise here, Kay and the brothers in the base came over to see if there was anything wrong, but they immediately saw this scene. "Shit." The two brothers decisively covered their eyes with their hands and then peeped out a little. The corner of Kay's mouth also twitched. What was going on? What was going on with Boss and Feng Ling? Seeing someone coming over, Feng Ling suddenly stepped on Nanheng's foot fiercely, bent her leg back, and kicked at his leg bone. Nanheng released her in time and dodged her attack with his leg. Feng Ling raised her hand and rubbed it hard on her neck, glanced at him coldly, and then turned to look at Kay and the others, saying coldly, "What are you looking at?" Kay coughed, saw the bite mark on Feng Ling's neck, and was about to leave with the other two brothers, when Feng Ling suddenly said, because they seemed to understand something, "Just now a snake came over and I was bitten. Boss just came to help me suck the poison out, so it's not what you saw." It would have been better if she hadn't explained, but as soon as she did, Kay and the others immediately fled faster. Damn, with Feng Ling's ability, let alone being bitten by a snake, even if she was bitten, how could a snake have climbed to her neck without being discovered? And it could even bite her neck. What kind of snake could do that? Seeing them running fast, Feng Ling turned to look at Nanheng with a livid face, but Nanheng put one hand in his black trouser pocket and the other hand played with the silencer he had taken from her, raising his eyebrows at her very unkindly. Feng Ling closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and suddenly reached out. "Give me back the gun." Nanheng sneered. "Speaking of being bitten by a snake, when you were on a mission in the United States, you were really bitten by a poisonous snake in the jungle. Do you still remember how I sucked the poison out for you?" Feng Ling kept a straight face and said nothing. If it hadn't been for that incident, he wouldn't have found out that she was a woman. She gave up the gun in his hand, turned to leave, and then pulled out the dagger at her feet, threw it behind her fiercely, deeply stabbed it into the ground, and walked away quickly with no expression on her face. Nanheng glanced at the dagger accurately inserted into the ground at his feet, snorted, picked up the dagger, and followed her. Ji-Nuan didn't sleep well and was startled in her sleep. She turned over and felt an inexplicable chill on her back. She opened her eyes with a jerk, only to see a black muzzle pointed at her head. Ji-Nuan didn't know what was going on. She didn't know what was going on. She was startled, and at the same time, her face immediately changed into a more obvious panic, and she hurriedly sat up. The muzzle had been pointed at her. She shrank in the corner of the wooden bed, hugged her legs tightly, and looked up at the owner of the gun who was holding it. Akib's finger pulled the trigger, looked at her coldly, and asked in English, "Tell me, who on earth sent you to lurk here? Do you think you can escape by deliberately spilling the soup? Huh? What a joke, thinking that you're smart." With that, the cold muzzle was directly pressed against her forehead. As long as his thumb gently pressed, Ji-Nuan's head would be pierced by the bullet in an instant. Chapter 291. Akib was about to pull the trigger, but Ji-Nuan saw that there was no one else in the cabin, not even the old woman who had been protecting her. She thought she might really die this time, but fortunately, she didn't implicate Mo Jingxian. She felt a chill in her heart and slowly closed her eyes, but the sweat overflowing from her nose clearly showed her fear and nervousness, which was not the instinctive reaction of a well-trained informant or base personnel. Akib glanced at her hesitantly again, but he still couldn't let this kind of person live. He was about to kill her, when suddenly, Dolly ran in from outside. Dolly didn't know what he said, but it sounded like he was in a hurry. Akib paused, withdrew his eyes from Dolly, looked at Ji-Nuan coldly and said in English, "Control is our distinguished guest. He hasn't eaten or drunk anything for 4 days. No matter how strong his mind and body are, he can't hold on. Now he has collapsed and will die at any time." Ji-Nuan still looked at him blankly as if she couldn't hear anything. Seeing that she was still scared out of her wits, Akib suddenly put away the gun impatiently, turned back, said a few words to Dolly in Cambodian, and left. Jean Wan's heart was beating like a drum. She didn't expect that she would escape death, and the reason why she escaped death was that Emo Jingshan hadn't eaten or drunk anything for 4 days. He had fallen down to distract Akib's attention from her. Akib said that Emo Jingshan had collapsed. What did that mean? Did he faint or did something happen to him? Jean Wan didn't dare to show her worry on her face. She just looked at Dolly standing in the room with fear. Dolly signaled her with his eyes to get out of bed and follow him. Jean Wan bit her lower lip and pointed to her hand, which was still wrapped in gauze, meaning that she could no longer deliver food or do anything in her current state. Dolly impatiently kicked the wooden bed under her. Knowing that she was mute and couldn't hear anything, he muttered a few curses and impatiently urged her to go with him. Jean Wan could only get off the bed with a timid expression. She shrunk her neck and followed behind him as though she was afraid of death. Dolly took her to the surrounded cabin where Emo Jingshan was. Jean Wan was a little worried that they would continue to carry out the order Akib had given her last night. She was thinking about how to avoid this deadlock. Suddenly, Akib signaled her with his eyes to go to the stone table over there and put the bowl of water in. Jean Wan looked at him in confusion. Akib pointed at the water and then at the cabin where Emo Jingshan lived. His meaning was obvious. He wanted her to go in and deliver the water. Not delivering food but water instead? What does that mean? The door of the cabin was open. She remembered that Emo Jingshan's body did not show any signs of being tied up, but he did not come out. Could he have really fainted? Jean Wan slowly moved to the door of the cabin and looked in. She saw Emo Jingshan, who had always been tall and straight, sitting against the wooden wall by the window of the cabin. His eyes were closed, his face was pale, and his lips were a little cracked and white. Obviously, he was seriously dehydrated and was in a semi-coma. He did not lie down but insisted on sitting there, closing his eyes to rest. It turned out that their purpose was to let her go in and feed him water. Jean Wan glanced at him and then turned her eyes to the bowl of water on the rough stone table outside. She walked over and, under Dolly's cold stare, picked up the bowl of water. She didn't know if Emo Jingshan had been refusing to eat their food and water because he was worried that they would poison him, or if he was just resisting, but now she was even more uncertain whether there was poison in the bowl of water. As Jean Wan walked to the cabin with the bowl in her hands, she suddenly spilled some of the water in the bowl on the back of her hand that had been scalded last night. It hurt so much that she dropped the bowl and the whole bowl of water spilled out in an instant. Seeing her clumsy appearance, Dolly was about to kick her and even wanted to take out a gun and shoot her. But he remembered that Akib had told him that Control had completely refused everyone here, but this woman was not one of them. Moreover, women were more careful than men like them. Now she was asked to take care of Control, find a way to feed him water, make him eat, and keep him alive. That was the right thing to do. Otherwise, if Control really died like this, they would lose the trump card in their hands that could threaten 11 Base and the American police, let alone the fact that they hadn't got those secrets yet. He had to be kept alive. Dolly suppressed his temper, cursed, and asked Jean Wan to fetch another bowl of water. Jean Wan got up shakily, nodded at him, and then trotted to the man-made well near the cooking tent, got a bowl of clean water, and carefully brought it over. Dolly glared at her, warned her not to dawdle, and told her to go in and feed him the water. But after she went in, Dolly and several people guarded the door and the window, staring at the situation inside and watching Jean Wan and Emo Jingshan's expressions. They would not miss any suspicious clues. Jean Wan walked in and quickly came up to Emo Jingshan. She tried to make her raised hand tremble a little, but her trembling would not be regarded as excitement or nervousness. They would only think that she was afraid. She carefully brought the water to Emo Jingshan's slightly parched lips. Even though the man had not eaten, drank, washed, or slept for 4 days and his breathing was much thinner than usual, when his breath brushed against her hand, it was still warm, clear, and uniquely Emo Jingshan's scent. Jean Wan raised the bowl and tried to feed him the water, but the man's lips were closed. Although he didn't close them tightly, she couldn't feed him. She couldn't speak, so she could only pat him gently on the shoulder with her hand. Mo Jingshan frowned and didn't open his eyes. Feeling the bowl of water near his mouth, he turned his head away. Jinwan was really anxious this time. She pressed the bowl hard against his mouth and patted him on the shoulder, but it was useless, so she had to raise her hand and pat him on the face. If it were any other time, Mo Jingshan would definitely smell the familiar scent on her body. He would definitely know who she was. But after 4 or 5 consecutive days of suffering, even if his sense of smell hadn't failed, he would not be so sensitive in his current state of dehydration and weakness. Seeing that he still didn't open his eyes or mouth, Jinwan simply pressed his outstretched leg down and sat on his knee. Chapter 292. The moment their eyes met, Jinwan stared at him and then pointed to the water in the bowl with her finger. All of Mo Jingshan's senses seemed to slowly recover at this moment. He smelled a long-lost fragrance coming from Jinwan's body. It was similar to the cold fragrance after taking a shower in the morning. It was fresh and sweet, with the calming smell of dawn in High City and the unique fragrance of long dew flowers in this place. The people outside the room were staring at their expressions. Jinwan didn't speak but signaled him to drink the water quickly with her eyes. Mo Jingshan didn't move, nor did he take the bowl of water. His cold gaze made her shudder. Even though Jinwan knew that it was impossible for him to show any intimacy or friendliness to her at this time, she was still frozen by his eyes. Just as she was about to force the water into his mouth, the man slowly closed his eyes once more, using the method of isolating himself from her gaze and refusing to meet her eyes again. Jinwan was anxious again. She sat on his lap and patted him hard on the shoulder with her other hand. Damn it, why couldn't she pretend to be a mute? Now she couldn't speak. She was so anxious. The man didn't even move his eyebrows. He just sat there silently, saying nothing and not opening his eyes. He seemed to treat the people here the same way he treated them, still so distant. Jinwan's hand was scalded, so she couldn't pinch him hard. She could only keep patting his shoulder in vain until the man frowned because of her constant harassment. When he opened his eyes again, Jinwan raised her scalded hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Mo Jingshan, you fool, I'm trapped here with you. I've tortured myself like this, but I'm still trying to survive. Your life is so important. You can't die. Jinwan couldn't speak and could only look at him, glaring at him. Mo Jingshan saw the white cloth wrapped around her hand and the burn marks on the unbandaged area outside the white cloth. The punctured blisters were infected by the ash of those useless herbs. After one night, they had become red and swollen, and a thin layer of skin had been festered. It could be seen that they were seriously scalded. Mo Jingshan's gaze slowly moved away from her hand. Jinwan stared at him with reddened eyes. Her gaze gradually turned pleading as she begged him to drink some water. However, the man only looked at her like this for a moment before closing his eyes again. His attitude was still as cold as ever. Seeing that she hadn't even fed him a mouthful of water, Dolly stood in front of the door and looked at her sharply, reaching for the gun at his waist. There was no need to keep such a good-for-nothing. Out of the corner of her eye, Jinwan saw Dolly touch the gun, and her heart beat wildly. Looking at Mo Jingshan's pale lips, she suddenly raised the bowl, drank a mouthful of water, leaned down, and threw herself on him. Before the man could react, she pressed her lips against his closed lips and poured all the water into his mouth. The man frowned at her sudden movement and opened his eyes abruptly. His deep, dark eyes met hers, which were still bright even though they were close at hand. Jinwan stuck out her tongue, opened his teeth, and licked his mouth in a way that Dolly and the people in front of the window couldn't see, as if she were licking him or deliberately punishing him. He instantly darkened his eyes and stared at her. Jinwan quickly stepped back, looking as if she had no choice but to feed him in this way to survive. She lowered her head, took another mouthful of water, and threw herself on him again, pouring water into his mouth. This time, the man didn't force his mouth to close. When her tongue seemed to unconsciously reach in, the man felt the softness of her lips and quietly sucked it. Jinwan shuddered and stared at him. They both knew each other's meaning. Even though Jin Wan understood why he had been so cold, at this moment, she still felt a sour feeling in her heart. If she continued to feed him with her mouth, it would be too deliberate. She was thinking about what to do when suddenly, the man's deep eyes turned cold. When Dolly came in and was about to take a closer look, he pushed Jin Wan mercilessly and pushed her out of his arms with great force. Jin Wan was caught off guard and suddenly fell back to the ground. Jin Wan reacted quickly. She immediately looked in horror at Dolly, who was approaching with cold eyes. She hurriedly picked up the bowl that had been spilled on the ground, stood up in a panic, and silently pointed to the water stain on the corner of Mo Jingshan's mouth, indicating that she had completed her task and begged Dolly not to kill her. Dolly gave her a cold look and tilted his head, indicating for her to go out. Jin Wan nodded quickly, turned around, and ran out. Dolly didn't miss any expression on her face. It was not until she went out that he turned his eyes back to Mo Jingshan. Mr. Control, you are really a man of extraordinary perseverance, but as long as we don't want you to die, you won't die. When you really pass out, we'll put something into your mouth even if we have to, just like that mute woman just now. I think you enjoy it very much. Why don't you let her feed you in this way for the next meal? Mo Jingshan coldly curved his lips. The water stain on his lips had dried. His lips were still a little cracked and pale, but he didn't lose his cool demeanor. He indifferently looked at Dolly's smug eyes. I'll be disgusted to death by you before I starve to death. The man spat out a cold and even disgusted English sentence. Dolly raised his eyebrows. Disgusted? Although the woman just now was mute, she was good-looking. How was she disgusted? Our people are all ready to make a meal of her in a few days. Don't you like Asian beauties? Looks like we should catch some Western beauties to please you. For the next 2 days, you should feel wronged. Let this Asian woman bring you food. That's right. Mo Jingshan's eyes became colder. You can get out of here. Dolly snorted. It's been 4 days. How long do you think you can hold on? Mo Jingshan didn't even lift his eyelids and said indifferently, don't let those disgusting women in again. Do you hate women so much? Dolly smiled coldly. Unfortunately, from now on, the task of delivering food and water to you will be handed over to that person just now. If you still don't eat or drink, I can shoot a useless piece of trash like her. With that, Dolly played with the gun in his hand, turned it around on his fingertips, and then sneered at Mo Jingshan's expression. Chapter 293. In the evening, she still couldn't avoid the meal. This time, Jin Wan couldn't avoid it by burning her hand. Akib asked Dolly to follow her from morning to night, and the only thing Jin Wan could do was to observe Dolly's habits. Dolly drank some wine at lunch and dinner every day, but he didn't drink too much, take a nap, or get drunk and give others any chance to escape. He was such a cautious and self-disciplined person. No wonder Akib trusted him so much. The old woman had retreated the gauze on Jin Wan's hand, but it was still not a professional way. The burn on the back of Jin Wan's hand was mixed with the color of herbal ash, which looked even more terrible. Fortunately, it was wrapped in white gauze, or she couldn't bear to look at it. As soon as Jin Wan appeared in Mo Jingshan's cabin, she saw the man who had been sitting by the wall during the day was now standing in front of the window, leaning against the wooden windowsill, coldly glancing at her who had just walked in. He could still stand up. It seemed that the water she forced into him in the morning had worked. At least he was not completely dehydrated. Dolly and the group of people stood outside as usual, watching. Jin Wan silently carried the wooden tray in, took out the 2 bowls inside, and then looked at Mo Jingshan, telling him to eat with her eyes. Mo Jingshan stood there motionlessly, just looking at her. There was a light black in his eyes, cold and bright. When Dolly stared at Jin Wan, Mo Jingshan's eyes were deep and dark with a dangerous warning. Jin Wan understood. He told her to behave, not to try to save him here, and not to make any suspicious movements. He was telling her to protect herself first. Jin Wan calmly looked at the food on the table, picked up the chopsticks and bowls, and walked up to him. Mo Jingshan looked at her and didn't move. Jin Wan thought that if she hadn't been caught here, she might have been able to stay with Feng Ling and Nan Heng and wait for the best time to rescue him. Now, Since she was already eating, she was completely on the same rope as him. Her first priority was not to protect herself, but to let him eat. She had persisted for 4 days. If she didn't eat or drink anymore, her child would have no father. As Jin-Wan approached with the bowl, Emo Jingshin's gaze grew colder and colder. Jin-Wan knew that the two of them were facing a dead end. It was his fault whether he ate the food or not, but if he was forced to eat it, at least he could be forgiven. After all, Emo Jingshin's strength should be no match for hers. If she really wanted to force him to eat it, he couldn't stop her. Dolly didn't think it was strange. She scooped a mouthful of rice with her chopsticks and placed it by his mouth. The man was still the same as when he drank water in the morning. He pursed his lips and stood there silently. Jin-Wan tried hard to make a few more gestures at him. In fact, she was making gestures for Dolly to see. She was telling him that if he didn't eat, she would be killed. Then she put her palms together and begged him to eat. Dolly didn't know what to say. Instead, she put her palms together and begged him to eat. Emo Jingshin looked at her coldly and suddenly sneered. He took a chair in the cabin and sat down. After sitting down, he still didn't say a word. It was as if an extreme mime was being performed in this large room. It was silent, but there were countless hidden sharpness. If the acting wasn't done well, the show would be ruined and the actors would die. Jin-Wan took a mouthful of rice and chewed it in her mouth. Then she opened her mouth and made an sound like a mute, as though telling him that the rice was very clean, that she had made it herself, and that it was not poisonous. Emo Jingshin sat down on the wooden chair, raised his hand, and was about to knock over another bowl on the table next to him, when he was suddenly held back by a very weak force. He turned his head and saw that Jin-Wan's burned hand had tightly grasped the corner of his clothes. His gaze coldly moved up and looked at her. Jin-Wan moved her lips and carefully protected the bowl so that it wouldn't be knocked over by him. Seeing the stalemate, she heard Dolly and the group of people outside talking and laughing in Cambodian, and from time to time, she could hear some sarcastic laughter. They had guns in their hands, and they had the power of life and death here. They could watch from outside as if they were watching a show. But Jin-Wan and Emo Jingshin had to put their lives on the line here. If they were not careful, they would be doomed eternally. How could she play this scene to the fullest? How could she reasonably force a man to be soft-hearted so that he could eat? Jin-Wan suddenly put down the bowl in her hand and slowly knelt down under Emo Jingshin's indifferent expression. Emo Jingshin sat on the chair and watched her suddenly kneel down. His calm black eyes flickered, but only for a moment. He still looked at her expressionlessly, but his hand was holding the armrest of the chair at an angle that no one could see. His slender fingers clenched tighter and tighter, and his knuckles turned white, but there was no change in his expression. Jin-Wan cried, begged, and knelt down. Dolly was enjoying himself outside. Seeing that Emo Jingshin didn't show any intention of eating, it seemed that this woman who was caught had nothing to do with him. She might not even be a Chinese. After all, if she was his compatriot, he might have some sympathy. It seemed that Emo Jingshin was not only strong-willed but also ruthless. He couldn't even move such a beautiful and pitiful woman. Seeing that he was still unmoved, Dolly simply walked in and put the gun directly on Jin-Wan's head. Jin-Wan knelt on the ground and didn't dare to move. Dolly pointed the gun at Jin-Wan's forehead and said in English with a sneer, "Mr. Control, are you really not going to eat? It seems that this woman is really useless. Since you hate her so much, I'll kill her in front of you. What do you think?" Emo Jingshin smiled faintly, looked at him coldly, and said in an indifferent tone, "Really?" Dolly pressed the trigger, glanced at Emo Jingshin's indifferent expression, and asked him, "Do you want to kill her or not?" Emo Jingshin lowered his eyes and didn't look at Jin-Wan again. He looked cold and expressionless. "Then kill her." Hearing this, Dolly narrowed his eyes. Jin-Wan knelt stiffly on the ground, and the black muzzle was pointed at her forehead. She didn't move, nor did Dolly, and the man sitting on the wooden chair didn't even lift his eyelids. There was a dead silence in the room for a few seconds. Suddenly, the corners of Dolly's mouth curved, and he chuckled in a low voice. He suddenly withdrew the gun and put it back to his waist. "Mr. Control, you really don't know how to be tender to women. Even such a fair and beautiful woman can't move you. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.